Welcome back to MrNightfall, and hello to anyone joining for the first time. This video features ghost stories and haunted encounters, carefully told to help you relax and drift into sleep. If you enjoy tonight's stories, like, subscribe, and comment your location below. Get cozy, clear your mind, and let's begin. Story 1. Something keeps knocking from inside the walls. At exactly 3:17 a.m. The house on Hemlock Street wasn't chosen. It was assigned a corporate relocation package with non-negotiable terms. Live here or lose the job that was my only lifeline after the divorce. The Victorian was grand in the way decaying things are grand, imposing, with gingerbread trim bleached bone white by decades of sun, a wraparound porch that sagged like a tired spine, and windows that watched the street with the blank, dusty eyes of the long dead. The realtor, a woman whose smile never reached her tired eyes, called it a fixer-upper with character. She didn't mention the silence that wasn't peaceful, but watchful. She didn't mention the smell that lingered beneath the fresh paint and lemon oil, a faint, cloying sweetness like overripe peaches left in a closed cupboard, mixed with the damp chill of deep earth. And she certainly didn't mention the knocking. It started on the third night. I was deep in the fragile sleep of exhaustion, tangled in unfamiliar sheets in the master bedroom on the second floor. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 3:16 a.m. The house was utterly still, the kind of quiet that presses on your eardrums until you hear your own blood rushing. Then, at precisely 3:17 a.m., it began. Thump! Not loud, not startlingly so, just a single, solid thump, like a heavy sack of flour dropped onto a wooden floor. It came from inside the wall beside the bed. The old plaster vibrated faintly against my back where I lay. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs. Rats? Old pipes settling? The house was ancient. Such things happened. I waited, straining my ears. Silence. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I exhaled, willing my muscles to relax. Just the house settling. Go back to sleep. The next night, same time, 3:17 a.m. Thump. Louder this time, closer, like it was moving through the wall cavity towards the head of the bed. My skin prickled. I lay rigid, eyes wide in the darkness, every nerve ending alight. The silence that followed was thicker, heavier, expectant. I didn't sleep again that night. By the fifth night, I was a wreck. Dark circles under my eyes, hands trembling from too much coffee and too little sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed at 3:15 a.m., staring at the wall, a baseball bat resting across my knees. 3:16. The air grew colder, a deep, bone-chilling cold that seeped through the plaster and into my bones. My breath fogged in the moonlight, slicing through the window. 317. Thump. Not just a thump. A bang. Violent, insistent, like a fist pounding on the inside of the wall right at head height. The plaster dust sifted down onto the bedspread. I jumped, gripping the bat, half rising. "Who's there?" My voice sounded thin, ridiculous in the suffocating quiet. No answer, just the echo of the bang fading into the house's bones. The cold receded slowly, leaving me shivering, sweat cooling on my skin. It wasn't rats, it wasn't pipes, it was calling. At the same time every night, a ritual, a summons. I started researching. The local historical society archives were dusty and smelled of mildew. The house was built in 1898 for Silas Crow, a reclusive watchmaker. His wife Eleanor died of consumption in 1905. They had one son, Thomas. Thomas vanished in 1923 at the age of 28. No body found. Presumed drowned in the river. The file contained a single faded photograph, a stern-faced man, a frail woman holding a small boy with dark, solemn eyes, and a note handwritten on the margin in spidery ink. Young Crow was prone to night terrors. Spent weeks locked in his room before he disappeared. Neighbors reported strange knocking sounds from the walls at odd hours. 3:17 a.m. wasn't odd. It was specific, obsessively specific. The knocking became my anchor to a waking nightmare. I stopped sleeping in the master bedroom. I dragged an air mattress to the sunroom on the first floor. 3:17 a.m. Thump. From the wall beside the daybed. I moved to the guest room down the hall. 3:17 a.m. Thump. From the shared wall with the master bedroom, I tried the basement, a damp concrete space filled with old trunks and the furnace's groan. 3:17 a.m. Thump. From the ceiling directly above me, so violent it shook dust from the rafters. It wasn't tied to a room. It was tied to me. And to the time, 3:17 a.m. The witching hour? No, something else. I checked the newspaper archives for the date Thomas Crow vanished, November 3rd, 1923. The time of his last sighting, 3:17 a.m. He'd been seen arguing with his father near the river dock. He never came home. The police report listed his personal effects found near the water. A pocket watch stopped at 3:17. The house wasn't haunted by a generic spirit. It was haunted by Thomas Crow's final, trapped moment. The knocking wasn't a ghost trying to get out. It was the sound of him trying to get back in. To the house, to the room where he lived, to the life he'd been torn from, and it was resonating through the walls, a desperate echo, seeking its source. The cold wasn't just cold anymore. It was the chill of the riverbank in November, the smell of overripe peaches, the scent of the orchard that used to border the property where Thomas was said to have played as a child. The house was replaying his memory, and I was the audience, the unwilling witness. I couldn't take it. I called the only person I thought might understand, the reclusive historian who'd helped me with the archives, Dr. Eris Thorne. His voice on the phone was dry, like dead leaves. Hemlock Street? 3:17? He sighed, a sound of profound weariness. That's the Crow Boy's time. He's not trying to scare you. He's trying to remember. The house. It holds on to pain like a sponge, especially the moment of severing, his. He paused. The knocking. It's him hitting the wall from the inside of his own memory, trapped in that second, over and over. He needs an anchor, something from then to tether him here. Otherwise, the echo just grows louder, more desperate, until it breaks something. What something? I whispered, my throat tight. The wall, Thorne said grimly. Or your mind. Find what he lost. Find the watch. It's the key. He died holding it. It's the only thing that bridges his time and yours. Bring it to the wall at 3:9. Let him feel it. It might quiet the echo. Finding the watch felt impossible, lost to the river for a century. But Thorne mentioned a detail from the police report. Thomas's father, Silas, had been a watchmaker. He'd made the pocket watch for his son's 18th birthday, unique, engraved. Silas, consumed by grief and guilt, rumors swirled he'd argued Thomas into leaving that night, had never thrown anything of his son's away. His workshop, in the small shed behind the house, had been sealed after his death in 1930. Check the shed, Thorne urged. If it's anywhere, it's there, behind a loose floorboard, in a false bottom drawer. Silas couldn't bear to look at it, but he couldn't bear to part with it either. The shed was a dilapidated wooden structure choked by ivy, its door rusted shut. I kicked it open, the hinges screaming in protest. Inside, dust motes danced in the single shaft of light from a grimy window. Shelves lined the walls, covered in tools, gears, springs, and the ghostly outlines of removed items. A workbench stood in the center, scarred and stained with oil. My fingers trembled as I pulled up loose floorboards, pried at the back of drawers, tapped walls for hollow spaces. Nothing. Despair clawed at me. Then I noticed the workbench itself. The wood was warped, but one section near the leg seemed newer, less stained. I pried at it with a screwdriver. It lifted. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth brittle with age, was a small leather pouch. Inside was the watch, heavy, silver, tarnished black in places. I opened it with numb fingers. The glass face was cracked, frozen forever at 3:17. The interior lid bore a single engraving. To Thomas, time is love, Father. That night, I didn't flee. I faced it. At 3:15 a.m., I stood in the master bedroom, the cold already seeping from the walls, frosting my breath. The pocket watch was heavy in my palm, ice cold. I pressed it flat against the wall where the knocking always started, right at head height. The plaster was freezing. I closed my eyes, holding my breath, waiting. 3:17 a.m. Silence. No thump, no bang. Just the frantic pounding of my own heart. Had it worked? Had the watch? Then a new sound. Not from inside the wall, from right beside me. A soft, wet, gurgling sigh, like water draining from a clogged sink. I snapped my eyes open. Standing inches away, partially translucent, shimmering like heat haze off pavement, was a young man, early 20s, dressed in clothes from another century. Trousers, a white shirt, suspenders. His hair was dark, plastered wetly to his forehead. Water dripped from his clothes, pooling on the floorboards at his feet. His eyes were wide, terrified, fixed on the wall where I held the watch. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me at the memory of his last moment. And he was shivering violently, his lips blue, his skin the color of river clay. He reached out a dripping hand towards the watch, his fingers passing through the metal, through my hand, holding it. A look of profound, heart-wrenching confusion crossed his face. He couldn't touch it. He couldn't grasp the anchor. He was trapped in the echo, unable to step into the present, unable to touch the proof of his own existence. The gurgling sigh became a choked sob. Tears, clear as river water, streamed down his pale cheeks. He looked at me then, his eyes locking onto mine, not with malice, with a desperate, drowning plea. Help me. The cold intensified, biting deep. The smell of river mud and wet wool filled the air. The pocket watch vibrated in my hand, a frantic, terrified pulse. Thomas wasn't just knocking, he was drowning. Over and over, in the memory of that November morning, pulled under by the current of his own unresolved end. The watch was ashore, but he couldn't reach it. I did the only thing I could think of. I didn't just hold the watch against the wall. I pressed it into the plaster, hard. Ignoring the splinters, ignoring the cold that burned like fire, I poured every ounce of my focus, my will, my desperate desire to help into that point of contact. Thomas, I whispered, my voice raw, it's real, you're real, take it, hold on. The vibration in the watch surged. The young man's form flickered, grew momentarily more solid. His dripping hand pressed flat against the wall, right over the watch. For a fraction of a second, his fingers seemed to touch, the metal. A look of pure, radiant relief flooded his face. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the first breath he had taken in a century. The gurgling sigh eased. Then the light from the window seemed to shift. Not the moonlight. A soft, golden, dawn-like light began to emanate from the wall itself, from the spot where the watch was pressed. It wasn't hot, it was warm, like sunlight on stone. Thomas stepped into the light, not through the wall, but into the glow. His form became less translucent, more solid, more peaceful. The water stopped dripping from his clothes. The terrible blue tinge left his lips. He looked at me one last time, not with fear, with gratitude. A small, sad smile touched his lips. He raised a hand, not in farewell, but in benediction. Then he turned and walked, not into the wall, but upwards, following the shaft of golden light that seemed to stretch towards the ceiling, towards the sky beyond. He dissolved into the light, like mist burning off a river at sunrise. The pocket watch in my hand grew warm. The frantic vibration stilled. The cold vanished, replaced by a deep, comforting warmth that seeped from the wall into my bones. The smell of river mud faded, replaced by the clean scent of rain-washed earth. The silence that fell wasn't the watchful, hungry silence of before. It was the deep, peaceful quiet of a burden lifted, of a debt paid. I sank to my knees, tears streaming down my face, the warm watch clasped tightly in my hand. Dawn painted the room in soft pinks and golds. The house felt different, lighter, freer. The walls no longer felt like prison bars, but like shelter. I still live in a house on Hemlock Street. The realtor was right. It has character, but it's no longer haunted by a trapped moment. It's inhabited by peace. I keep the pocket watch on the mantelpiece in the living room. It doesn't keep time. The hands are still frozen at 3:17, but sometimes, on quiet mornings, I swear I feel a faint, warm pulse coming from it. Not a knock, a heartbeat, steady, calm, finally at rest. And I know Thomas is no longer drowning in the dark. He found a shore, because someone finally held out a hand. Someone finally listened to the knocking from inside the walls. The house is quiet now, truly quiet. And for the first time in 100 years, the silence is a gift. The night grows deeper as we leave this story behind and move on to the next. Something tucks me in each night, but my bed faces the wrong direction. By morning, I should have questioned why the bed was bolted to the floor. That's the thought that haunts me now, lying awake in the pre-dawn darkness, staring at the window where the headboard should be but isn't. Again, the listing had been vague about the furniture. Fully furnished, move-in ready. I'd assumed it meant a couch, maybe a dining table. Not this monolithic four-poster bed. Its dark mahogany posts carved with intricate, unsettling patterns that seemed to shift in the low light. Its frame secured to the hardwood floor with iron brackets so deeply embedded they looked like part of the original construction. The landlord, a gaunt man named Mr. Voss, who spoke in a voice like dry leaves scraping concrete, had waved off my questions. Previous tenant was particular about orientation, he'd said, avoiding my eyes. Said the bed had to face east, for health reasons. He'd handed me the keys with fingers that trembled slightly and left before I could ask what particular meant. The first night, I was too exhausted to care. After 3 weeks of sleeping on a friend's lumpy sofa, Even a bed bolted to the floor felt like luxury. I fell asleep facing east, as intended, the tall windows at the foot of the bed framing the moon like a silver coin in a black velvet sky. I woke at 6:17 a.m. to sunlight streaming directly into my eyes, not from the east, but from the west. The bed had rotated 180 degrees overnight, the headboard now pressed against the western wall, the footboard facing the rising sun. I sat up, disoriented, my heart hammering. I checked the brackets. They were still firmly attached to the floor, the screws unmoved, the wood unmarred. It was impossible. A bed weighing close to 500 pounds doesn't pivot on its own, especially not while someone is sleeping in it. I spent 20 minutes straining against the frame, trying to wrestle it back into position. It didn't budge an inch. Finally, sweating and frustrated, I gave up and went to work, chalking it up to sleep-deprived confusion. I must have misremembered which way I'd fallen asleep. That night, I performed an experiment. Before bed, I placed 3 distinct markers: a red sock under the eastern leg, a book titled East on the nightstand to the right of the headboard, and a strip of masking tape with East written in bold letters on the eastern wall. I took a photo with my phone for good measure, then I went to sleep facing east, the moon once again visible through the footboard windows. I woke at 6:18 a.m. to direct sunlight in my eyes. The bed faced west. The red sock now lay under the western leg. The book East sat on the nightstand to the left of the headboard, where the western nightstand should be. The masking tape now read East on the western wall. Every marker had moved with the bed, as if the entire room had rotated around me while I slept. The brackets remained untouched, the screws tight, the floor unscratched. My phone photo showed the bed facing east before I slept. The evidence was irrefutable. The bed had turned itself. Panic set in. I called Mr. Voss immediately. His phone went straight to voicemail. I left 3 increasingly frantic messages. No response. I considered leaving, packing a bag and checking into a motel, but my finances were stretched thin. I'd signed a 6-month lease. Breaking it would cost me everything I had. And beneath the fear lurked a stubborn, dangerous curiosity. Why? Why would a bed turn itself? Why always 180 degrees? Why leave me tucked in so carefully each morning, the blanket smoothed, the pillow fluffed, the duvet pulled precisely to my shoulders as if by meticulous hands? Because that was the other part of it. No matter how I'd fallen asleep, tangled in sheets, half on the floor, blanket kicked to the foot, I always woke perfectly tucked in. Not just covered, but tucked. The corners of the duvet folded tightly around my feet, the edges of the top sheet hospital tight against a mattress, the pillow arranged just so beneath my head. It was the kind of precise, loving tuck-in a parent gives a child, or a caretaker gives a patient. On the 3rd night, I decided to stay awake. I brewed strong coffee, positioned myself in the armchair in the corner, and watched the bed. Midnight passed. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. The house settled around me with its usual symphony of creaks and sighs. At 3:03 a.m., the temperature in the room dropped precipitously. My breath fogged in the air, though the thermostat read 72 degrees. And then I saw it. A distortion in the air above the bed, like heat haze on asphalt. It coalesced slowly into a figure, tall, slender, dressed in what looked like a nurse's uniform from another century, high-collared, long-sleeved, the fabric seeming to absorb the dim light rather than reflect it. The figure's face was indistinct, blurred, as if seen through frosted glass, but its movements were precise, deliberate. It approached the bed, which still faced east, and stood beside it for a full minute, head tilted as if observing me sleeping. Then, with infinite gentleness, it began to tuck me in, smoothing the blanket over my chest, folding the duvet around my feet, adjusting the pillow beneath my head. Its hands passed through the fabric without disturbing it, yet the results were undeniably real. When the tucking was complete, the figure stepped back. It placed its palms flat against the headboard and pushed. The bed rotated silently, smoothly, effortlessly, 180 degrees. East became west. The figure watched for a moment, then dissolved into the shadows near the western wall, leaving only the scent of antiseptic and old linen hanging in the frigid air. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. At dawn, I drove to the county records office. The house was built in 1898 as a private residence, but from 1912 to 1947, it had served another purpose: St. Agnes Convalescent Home for Nervous Disorders. Not a hospital, not an asylum, but a discreet retreat for wealthy families to house relatives deemed hysterical, melancholic, or simply inconvenient. The records were sparse. Private institutions kept poor documentation. But one name appeared repeatedly in staff logs: Nurse Eleanor Gable, employed from 1923 until the home's closure in 1947. She was noted for her exceptional devotion to patient comfort and her unwavering adherence to routine. I found more at the local historical society. A yellowed newspaper clipping from 1946 mentioned a fire at St. Agnes that claimed no lives but destroyed most patient records. The article included a grainy photograph of staff standing before the building. Among them, a tall woman in a nurse's uniform, her face partially obscured by shadow, one hand resting on the shoulder of a vacant wheelchair. The caption identified her as Eleanor Gable. Back at the house, I searched for any trace of the convalescent home's past. The other rooms had been thoroughly modernized, but my bedroom, the former patient room, retained its original features. And there, behind the western headboard, now facing east, after I'd finally managed to rotate the bed back with the help of 2 friends and a crowbar, I found it. A small brass plaque screwed to the wall, nearly hidden by layers of paint. It read, "Room 7, for the comfort and recovery of our most delicate patients. East-facing for morning light therapy." The previous tenant hadn't been particular about orientation. The room had been designed to face east for therapeutic reasons, for patients too fragile to move, too ill to turn toward the sun themselves. Someone had ensured they received the healing light of dawn, even if it meant turning their entire world around them while they slept. That night, I didn't fight it. I let the bed face east as intended. I fell asleep, watching the moon through the footboard windows. At 3:03 a.m., I woke to the familiar drop in the temperature. I didn't open my eyes. I lay perfectly still, feeling the presence approach, feeling the gentle pressure as invisible hands smoothed my blanket, tucked the duvet around my feet, fluffed my pillow. Then came the soft pressure against the headboard, the silent rotation of the massive bed. When it stopped, I knew I faced west again. But this time, I spoke, softly, without opening my eyes. "Thank you, Eleanor." The air stilled. The cold deepened for a single breathless moment. Then, so faint I might have imagined it, came the whisper of fabric moving away, and the barest hint of a sigh that sounded like relief. The next morning, I researched Eleanor Gable further. Her obituary from 1951 was brief. Died peacefully in her sleep, never married, devoted her life to caring for others. But buried in a footnote of a local history book was a detail that made my blood run cold. Nurse Gable was known to continue her rounds long after St. Agnes closed, visiting former patients in their homes, ensuring they were properly settled for the night. Some families reported finding their loved ones mysteriously repositioned in bed, always facing east by morning. She hadn't just worked at St. Agnes. She'd become its spirit, its eternal caretaker. And when the building was converted to apartments, when room 7 became my bedroom, she'd never stopped her rounds. She was still tucking in her patients, still ensuring they faced the healing morning light, even if it meant turning their beds around while they slept. I stopped trying to keep the bed facing east. It was pointless. More than that, it was disrespectful. Eleanor wasn't haunting this room. She was caring for it. For me. In her own quiet, persistent way, she was offering the only comfort she knew how to give. Order, routine, the certainty of being tended to in the vulnerable hours of night. Now, every evening, I make my bed with extra care. I smooth the sheets just so. I fold the duvet neatly at the foot, and before I sleep, I whisper, "Good night, Eleanor." Some nights, I wake to find the bed already turned, the blankets tucked tighter than I'd left them. Other nights, I feel the gentle pressure of hands adjusting my pillow, hear the soft rustle of starched cotton near the western wall. The bed still faces the wrong direction by morning, but I've come to understand it's not wrong. It's exactly as it should be. For a woman who spent her life ensuring others faced the dawn, even when they couldn't do it themselves, this is the only orientation that makes sense. And in the quiet hours between midnight and sunrise, when the house holds its breath and the world outside falls away, I am not alone. I am being cared for, tucked in, turned toward the light, by a ghost who never stopped being a nurse, and a room that remembers what it means to heal. The story ends here. Let's begin the next one. The Archive of the Unclaimed. I am writing this statement on a piece of paper I stole from the lobby of a police station in Nebraska. I don't live in Nebraska. I don't know anyone in Nebraska. But I drove until my car ran out of gas, and this is where I stopped. My hands are stained black. No matter how much I scrub them with industrial soap, the blackness doesn't come off. It's not ink. It's not oil. It's underneath the skin. If you are reading this, do not take the job at the sub-level 4 storage facility in Detroit. If you see an ad on a telephone pole or a Craigslist post asking for a night archivist with a pay rate of $40 an hour, cash, close your eyes. Walk away. Forget you ever saw it. I was 26 years old. I was a dropout with a mountain of debt and a landlord who liked to bang on my door at 6 a.m. asking for rent money I didn't have. I was desperate. That is the word that defines everyone who ends up at the archive. Desperation. I met the hiring manager, a man named Mr. Calloway, in a portable office trailer sitting in the middle of a fenced-off concrete lot. He was a small man, bald with glasses so thick his eyes looked like tiny black beads swimming in water. He didn't ask for a resume. He didn't ask for a background check. "Can you lift 50 pounds?" he asked. His voice was dry like sandpaper rubbing together. "Yes," I said. "Are you claustrophobic?" "No." "Do you have family that checks on you daily?" "No," I lied. I had a mom in Ohio, but we hadn't talked in months. "Good," Calloway said. He stamped a piece of paper. "You start tonight, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. Your job is simple. You walk the rows. You check for moisture. You check for structural integrity of the boxes. And you never, under any circumstances, open a box marked with a red tag." "What's in the boxes with red tags?" I asked. Calloway looked up. His beady eyes went cold. "Personal effects of the unclaimed. Things the state doesn't know what to do with, but can't destroy. Just check the humidity, kid. Don't be a hero." The facility wasn't a building. It was a hole. To get to work, I had to take a freight elevator that rattled and screamed as it descended. It took 3 full minutes to get to the bottom, sub-level 4. It was deep enough that the air felt heavy. It pressed against your eardrums. It smelled of old paper, mildew, and something sharp and metallic, like pennies that had been soaking in vinegar. The archive was massive. It was a concrete cavern filled with endless rows of metal shelving. The shelves went up 20 feet, reaching the dark ceiling where flickering fluorescent tube lights buzzed like dying insects. The rows stretched back so far you couldn't see the end. It was a labyrinth of cardboard and steel. My station was a small desk near the elevator. I had a flashlight, a clipboard, and a radio that only received static. The first week was agonizingly boring. I walked the rows. My footsteps echoed, creating a slap, slap, slap sound that bounced off the concrete walls. I shined my light on thousands of boxes. Most were white bankers' boxes with boring labels. Tax records 1998, city plan and debt, court transcripts. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that hurts. If I stopped walking, I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system, which sounded like a giant beast breathing in its sleep. The weirdness started on the second Monday. I was in row 40, a section called the Deep Stacks. This was where the older boxes were. The air was colder back there. The lights were dimmer. I was checking a shelf when I heard it. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It sounded like a mouse scratching at cardboard. "Great," I muttered. "Rats." I took my flashlight and followed the sound. It was coming from a box on the bottom shelf. It was an old box, brown and sagging. It had a red tag. The label on the tag was handwritten in faded black marker. Item, Gas 8490. Unknown. Origin, recovered from Site B. I crouched down. The scratching was coming from inside the box. Scritch, scritched. Then it stopped. "Hello?" I whispered. I felt stupid talking to a box. A voice whispered back. It wasn't a rat. It was a human voice, a woman's voice. "It's so tight," she whispered. "My fingers are breaking." I fell backward, landing hard on the concrete. I scrambled away, shining my light on the box. It sat there, motionless. "Who's there?" I shouted. My voice cracked. Silence. I stood up, shaking. I told myself it was the acoustics, the ventilation fans playing tricks on my tired brain. I marked check for rodents on my clipboard and practically ran back to my desk. I didn't tell Calloway. I needed the money. I couldn't lose this job over a hallucination. 3 nights later, the leaking started. I was doing my rounds in row 12. I smelled it before I saw it. It smelled like rotten lilacs and burnt hair. It was a thick, cloying scent that coated the back of my throat. I followed the smell to a shelf at eye level. There was a box with a red tag. Label, family case. 102, evidence. A black liquid was oozing out of the bottom corner of the box. It wasn't water. It was thick, viscous, like tar or molasses. It dripped onto the floor with a heavy plop, plop, plop. I shone my flashlight on the puddle. The black liquid was moving. It wasn't flowing downhill. It was swirling, bubbling, as if it was boiling, but the room was freezing cold. As I watched, the puddle stretched out a thin tendril, like a finger, reaching toward the toe of my boot. I stepped back. Nope, 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 nope. I grabbed my radio. Calloway? Mr. Calloway, are you there? Static. I walked back to the desk to use the landline phone. It was dead. No dial tone, just a low, rhythmic thumping sound on the line, like a heartbeat. I went back to row 12 with a roll of duct tape. I don't know why. I thought maybe I could seal the box. When I got back to row 12, the box was gone. The shelf was empty. The puddle of black slime was gone. The floor was dry. I checked the row number, row 12. I was sure of it. Then I looked at the shelf above. The box was there. It had moved up one shelf. I hadn't touched it. There was no one else in the facility. The elevator hadn't moved. I stared at the box. The black liquid was now seeping through the cardboard faster, soaking the bottom. "Why did you move?" I whispered. The box vibrated. It shook violently, rattling against the metal shelf. Then a sound came from inside. Not a whisper this time, a scream. It was a muffled, high-pitched scream of absolute agony. It sounded like a man being crushed in a compactor. "Let me out!" The scream was so loud it shook dust from the ceiling. I dropped my flashlight. Darkness swallowed the row. I scrambled on the floor, feeling for the metal cylinder. My hand brushed against something wet, something sticky. I recoiled. I found the light and clicked it on. The black slime was on my hand. It burned. It felt like acid. I wiped it on my pants, panicking. The screaming stopped. The box sat there, silent. I ran. I ran all the way to the elevator and hit the button. I stood there shivering, waiting for the slow, agonizing descent of the cage. When it finally arrived, I took it up to the surface and sat in my car until sunrise. I should have quit then. I really should have. But I checked my bank account balance on my phone. Negative $40. Rent was due in 2 days. I went back. God help me, I went back. That was night 7, the last night. When I arrived, Calloway wasn't in the trailer. The door was unlocked. His coffee cup was on the desk, mold growing in the cold liquid. A note was taped to the monitor. Check row 99. Urgent! I'd never been to row 99. The facility supposedly ended at row 80. I took the elevator down. The air was different tonight. It was hot, humid. The smell of rotten lilacs was everywhere, overpowering. I walked past rows, 10, 20, 50. The lights were buzzing louder, popping and flickering. Shadows seemed to dance in the corners of my vision. I reached row 80. Behind it, there was a heavy plastic tarp hanging from the ceiling, painted with a warning, "Do not enter. Structural instability." I pulled the tarp back. There was a tunnel. It wasn't concrete anymore. The walls were rough-hewn rock, braced with old rotting wood beams. Shelves had been hammered directly into the rock. This was row 99. The boxes here weren't cardboard. They were wooden crates bound in chains. Some were metal safes. All of them had red tags. But the tags didn't have numbers anymore. They had names: Allison, Michael, the Traveler, Subject 4, and they were all leaking. The floor of the tunnel was covered in inches of the black sludge. It rippled like a dark ocean. I stepped onto a wooden pallet to keep my boots dry. "Hello?" I called out. "Mr. Calloway?" I heard a splashing sound further down the tunnel. I shone my light. Mr. Calloway was standing at the end of the tunnel facing the wall. He was standing shin deep in the black slime. "Mr. Calloway," I said, stepping closer, "we need to get out of here. It's flooding." Calloway didn't turn around, but he spoke. "It's not flooding, Jack. It's emptying." He knew my name. I had never told him my name. "What do you mean?" I asked. Calloway turned around slowly. My stomach dropped. His eyes were gone. The sockets were filled with the black sludge. It poured down his cheeks like tears. His mouth was open in a rictus grin, and the sludge was bubbling up from his throat, spilling over his lips. "They aren't personal effects, Jack," Calloway gurgled. The voice sounded wet, thick. "They are the discarded, the memories people cut out, the sins cities want to bury, and they are so hungry." Calloway took a step toward me. The black sludge on the floor rose up. It wasn't liquid. It was a hive mind. It formed shapes, hands. Hundreds of black, oily hands rising from the muck, grasping at the air. "Join the archive," Calloway said. He spread his arms. The hands grabbed his legs. They pulled. Calloway didn't scream. He laughed. He laughed as the sludge pulled him down. He sank like he was in quicksand. The blackness swallowed his waist, his chest, his neck. His head remained above the surface for a moment. "Check the box, Jack," he whispered. "Your box." Then he was gone. I backed away, terrified. The sludge was rushing toward me, a tidal wave of oil and hate. I turned to run, but I slipped. I fell face first onto a wooden crate. My light shined on the label, Jackson Miller, the night archivist. It was my name. It was my box, and it was shaking. Something inside was pounding on the wood. Thump, thump, thump. "Let me out!" A voice screamed from inside the box. It was my voice. It was me inside the box. I stared at it, paralyzed. How could I be in the box if I was standing here? The lid of the crate began to pry open. Black fingers curled over the edge. A face pushed its way out. It was my face, but it was made of the black slime. It had my eyes, my nose, my mouth, but it was melting, shifting. "You're late for your shift," the thing that looked like me hissed. I scrambled backward. The sludge on the floor grabbed my boot. It burned. It felt like it was eating through the leather. I kicked my foot loose, leaving the boot behind. I ran. I ran back through the tunnel, past the tarp, into the concrete section. The archive was alive. Every box in every row was rattling, millions of boxes, a cacophony of scratching, screaming, and crying. The noise was deafening. It sounded like a stadium full of people burning to death. The black liquid was pouring from the shelves, creating waterfalls of slime. I sprinted for the elevator. My sock was soaked in the sludge. My foot felt numb, dead. I reached the elevator. I hit the button. Nothing happened. I hit it again. "Come on, come on!" I looked back at the rows. A wave of blackness was rushing down the main aisle. At the crest of the wave was Calloway, or what was left of him. His body was fused with others. Faces I didn't know, women, children, men, all screaming in unison. "The Unclaimed!" the collective voice roared. I pried the elevator doors open with my fingers. The car wasn't there. It was still at the top. There was a ladder in the shaft. I didn't hesitate. I jumped for the ladder. I climbed until my muscles screamed. Below me, the sludge filled the elevator shaft. It was rising. I could hear them climbing the ladder behind me, wet, slapping sounds. Slap, slap, slap. "We remember you, Jack," the voices whispered from the dark below. "We have your debt. We have your fear." I reached the top, sub-level 1, then the lobby. I burst out of the shaft door and rolled onto the linoleum floor of the loading dock. It was night outside. The air was cool. I ran to my car. I drove. I didn't look back at the warehouse. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I drove for 3 days straight. I stole gas. I slept in rest stops for 20 minutes at a time. I thought I escaped, but yesterday I stopped at a gas station to wash my hands. My foot had turned black. The skin was hard, like a shell, and my hands, the stains won't come off. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what happened an hour ago. I was sitting in this police station lobby trying to work up the courage to turn myself in, to tell them everything. A delivery man walked in. He was carrying a package, a brown cardboard box. He set it on the counter near me. The label on the box caught my eye. Jackson Miller, recovered effects. It had a red tag, and it was leaking. A single drop of black liquid fell from the corner of the box and hit the pristine white floor. Plop! I heard a scratching sound from inside. Scritch, scritch, and then a whisper. "I'm still in here, Jack. You left me in the dark." I stood up and walked out. I left my car. I'm walking now. I'm walking into the cornfields. I can feel the blackness spreading up my leg. It feels cold. It feels heavy. I know what happens when it reaches my heart. I won't die. That would be too easy. I will become a box. And someone, some desperate kid who needs money, is going to be hired to watch me. Please, if you see the ad, if you see the job for the archive, don't let me out. Whatever you do, don't let me out. And so, this story comes to an end. Let's start another. The dead frequency of station K109. I am writing this on a typewriter because I can no longer trust anything with a screen. If you see a digital clock flicker, if your phone buzzes but no one is calling, if the radio in your car turns on by itself, run. Do not investigate. Do not try to tune it in. Just run until you find silence. My name is Elias. I was a radio enthusiast, a ham operator, the kind of guy who spent his weekends building antennas in his backyard and listening to static from across the ocean. I love the noise. I love the idea that the air around us is filled with invisible voices just waiting to be caught. I found the job on a forum for vintage electronics. A user named Signal Master posted a request for a caretaker for an old AM radio station in the Mojave Desert. Station K109, night shift engineer, maintain transmitter, log signal strength, 3,000 month, cash, isolation required. It was perfect for me. I needed the money and I wanted to get away from the city, from the noise of modern life. I drove out to the coordinates. It was miles from civilization, a small concrete building at the base of a massive rusted radio tower that stretched hundreds of feet into the desert sky. The tower hummed. You could feel it in your teeth when you got close. The previous engineer was waiting for me. He was a thin, twitchy man named Ornate. He had dark circles under his eyes and chewed his fingernails until they bled. "It's automated," Ornate said, shoving a ring of keys into my hand. "The playlist is on a loop. Old jazz, big band, stuff nobody listens to. Your job is to keep the transmitter cool. Check the gauges. If the needle goes into the red, flip the breaker. That's it. Why do you need a person here if it's automated? I asked. Ornate looked at the tower. Because sometimes it drifts. The signal drifts. You have to bring it back. Drifts to where? He didn't answer. He got in his truck and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust that hung in the still air. I settled in. The station was a time capsule. Reel-to-reel tape decks, vacuum tube amplifiers, a smell of ozone and old dust. The only modern thing was a small mini-fridge in the corner. The first week was peaceful. I sat in the control booth, watching the VU meters bounce to the rhythm of Duke Ellington and Benny Goodman. I read books. I drank coffee. I watched the sun set over the dunes. But on the 8th night, the drift started. It was 2:00 a.m. The station was playing a slow, mournful trumpet solo. Suddenly, the music warped. It slowed down, the pitch dropping until it sounded like a dying cow. Woo! Then static, white noise that sounded like screaming. I looked at the frequency dial. It had moved. We were supposed to be at 1090 a.m. The needle was drifting down 1080, 1070, 1060. I grabbed the manual tuning knob. It was hot to the touch. I tried to turn it back, but it fought me. It felt like someone was holding it from the other side. Come on, I grunted, twisting hard. The static cleared, but it wasn't jazz. A voice cut through the speakers, a voice that sounded wet, gargled, like someone speaking with a throat full of water. Is anyone listening? I froze. This was a broadcast frequency. It shouldn't be picking up two-way traffic. I grabbed the microphone. This is station K109. You are interrupting a broadcast. Identify yourself. Silence. Then a laugh, a dry, crackling laugh. Elias, you have pretty eyes. I dropped the mic. It hit the desk with a thud. How did they know my name? I hadn't told anyone I was here except the forum user, and I used a pseudonym online. I wrestled the tuning knob back to 1090. The jazz returned, upbeat and cheerful, mocking my fear. I checked the transmitter logs. There was no record of the interruption. According to the machine, the jazz had been playing the whole time. I told myself it was interference. A trucker with a powerful CB radio messing with me. The next night, it got worse. I was doing my rounds, checking the massive cooling fans in the transmitter room. The hum of the tower was louder tonight. It felt heavy, pressing on my chest. As I walked past the main capacitor bank, I heard tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from inside the metal casing of the transmitter. I stopped. Hello? Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, intelligent. I put my ear against the warm metal. Let us out, a chorus of whispers said. It sounded like hundreds of people whispering in unison. It burns! The wire burns! I jumped back. Then the lights in the room flickered and died. The only light came from the glowing orange vacuum tubes inside the transmitter. In that dim orange light, I saw shadows moving, not on the walls, inside the tubes. The vacuum tubes were glass cylinders the size of milk jugs. Inside, filaments glowed to amplify the signal. But inside tube 4, something was crawling. A black, shadowy shape, pressing its hands against the glass from the inside. It had a face of pure anguish, mouth open in a silent scream. I ran back to the control booth and locked the door. I grabbed the station phone to call the owner, Signal Master. The line was dead. No dial tone, just the sound of wind. Then the wind stopped, and a voice spoke. "Don't leave, Elias. The broadcast is just starting." I slammed the phone down. I sat in the chair, staring at the glass window that looked out into the desert. It was pitch black outside. Then the on-air light turned on. I hadn't touched the console. The music stopped. A voice came over the studio monitors. It was my voice. "Welcome back to the midnight hour," the voice said. "Tonight, we have a special request for Elias, a song from the other side." Then a sound began to play. It wasn't music. It was the sound of digging. Shovels hitting dirt, crunch, scrape. Then the sound of wood splintering. A coffin lid breaking. Then heavy breathing. I covered my ears. "Stop it! Stop it!" I reached for the master brake to kill the power. My hand stopped inches from the switch. Pain, white-hot pain, shot through my arm. I looked down. My veins. The veins in my arm were glowing orange, like the vacuum tubes. I could feel the electricity surging through me. I was becoming part of the circuit. "Do not cut the signal," my own voice said through the speakers. "We need the carrier wave. We need to travel." I fell to the floor, convulsing. The pain was unbearable. I could feel voices in my head, memories that weren't mine. I remembered dying in a fire. I remembered drowning in a lake. I remembered being buried alive. They were the voices of the dead, and they were using the radio tower as a bridge. I blacked out. I woke up the next morning on the floor. The sun was shining. The jazz was playing. My arm was burned, a Lichtenberg figure scar tracing down my skin like a lightning strike. I packed my bag. I was leaving. I didn't care about the money. I walked to my car. It wouldn't start. The battery was dead, completely drained. I checked my phone. Dead. I was stranded. I walked back to the station. I had to fix the car or find a radio to call for help. I went to the workshop in the back. I found a spare battery. As I was carrying it to the car, I looked up at the tower. There was something climbing it. A man. He was halfway up, clinging to the metal struts. "Hey!" I yelled. "Get down! It's dangerous!" He stopped. He turned his head 180 degrees like an owl. It was ornate, the previous engineer, but his eyes were gone, burned out sockets, and his mouth was sewn shut with copper wire. He let go of the tower. He fell hundreds of feet. I watched him hit the ground. Thud. I ran over to him. His body shattered on impact, but there was no blood. He was hollow. His skin was just a shell. Inside, he was filled with old radio parts. Transistors, wires, capacitors. He was a machine made of meat and junk. And he was still moving. His broken hand reached up and grabbed my ankle. A voice came from his chest, sounding like a broken speaker. "You are the new component. You must maintain the signal." I kicked him off and ran. I ran into the desert. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran away from the tower. I walked for hours. The sun beat down on me. I was dehydrated, delirious. I saw a house in the distance, a small shack. I ran to it. "Help, please!" I burst through the door. It was the control room. I was back at the station. I had walked in a circle. No, I had walked straight. The space around the tower was warped. It was a loop. I collapsed in the chair. The sun went down. The on-air light turned on. "Welcome back, Elias," the voice said. "Tonight, we are going to open the channel wide." The frequency dial began to spin on its own. Fast. A blur. The hum of the tower grew to a deafening roar. The glass of the control booth window shattered. Outside, in the desert, the sand began to vibrate. Shadows rose from the dunes, thousands of them. The ghosts of the airwaves, they floated toward the station. I knew what they wanted. They wanted a body. They wanted my body. I looked at the console. I couldn't turn it off. They controlled the power. But I saw the microphone cable. It was an XLR cable, thick and shielded. If I couldn't stop the signal, I had to stop the receiver. I grabbed the cable. I wrapped it around the main output transformer. I grounded the positive lead to the negative. A short circuit. I pulled tight. Boom! The console exploded. Sparks showered the room. Fire erupted from the tape decks. The screaming from the speakers turned into a high-pitched shriek of agony. No! The tower outside groaned. Metal twisted. I ran out the back door as the building caught fire. The tower was glowing red hot. The metal was melting. It collapsed. It fell in slow motion, crashing into the dunes with the force of a meteor. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I walked again. This time, the loop was broken. I found a highway by morning. I hitched a ride to the nearest town. I thought I was free, but I am not. I am writing this in a library. The person next to me is listening to music on headphones. I can hear it. Not the music. I can hear the static underneath the music. And in the static, I hear my name, Elias. We are still broadcasting. And my arm, the scar on my arm, is glowing, faintly, orange. I am a receiver now. I can't be around people. If I touch someone, they hear it too. They start to scream. They start to remember deaths they haven't died yet. I am going to the mountains, to a cave, somewhere deep underground where radio waves can't reach. If you hear a song on the radio that slows down, if you hear a voice that sounds like wet gravel, change the station, change it fast, before it changes you. And that is the end of this story. Now let's begin a new one. The Ghost in Apartment 4B keeps leaving. Fresh flowers on my pillow. I should have asked why the rent was so low. That's the thought that echoes through my mind now, lying awake at 3 a.m., with the scent of lilies thick in the air and another offering resting on my pillow, a single white camellia, dewdrop still glistening on its petals, though no florist in this city would have them in November. But when I signed the lease 3 weeks ago, desperation had clouded my judgment. Fresh out of grad school with a useless degree in art history and $20,000 of student debt, I'd been sleeping on a friend's couch for 2 months when I found the listing for 3B at the Hawthorne Arms. 1 bedroom, hardwood floors, bay window, $650 a month. Half the market rate for anything remotely habitable in the city. The property manager, a harried woman named Diane who smelled of cigarette smoke and regret, had barely looked at my application before sliding the lease across her desk. Just one rule, she'd said, tapping a chipped fingernail against the paper. Don't go up to 4B. It's been vacant since the incident. Building code violation. Stairs are unsafe. She'd said it so casually, like mentioning a broken elevator or spotty Wi-Fi. I'd signed without asking what incident she meant. The Hawthorne Arms was a 5-story walk-up built in 1923, all crumbling brick and ornate cornices blackened by decades of city soot. My apartment, 3B, was smaller than advertised but charming in its decay. The bay window overlooked a narrow alley where fire escapes zigzagged up the neighboring building. The kitchen had actual cabinets instead of particle board shelves, and the bedroom ceiling curved in a gentle barrel vault that made the space feel like a sanctuary. The only oddity was the ceiling itself. Directly above my bed, centered perfectly as if placed there with intention, was a water stain in the shape of a weeping willow. I noticed it the first night, lying in my sleeping bag on the bare mattress, my few boxes stacked against the walls. The stain wasn't new. The plaster around it was yellowed with age, but it was unmistakable. A graceful cascade of branches drooping toward the floor, each tendril rendered in shades of ochre and umber. I fell asleep wondering what pipe had burst years ago to create such an elegant ruin. I woke at dawn to the scent of gardenias, not the cloying, artificial fragrance of air freshener or candle wax, but the real thing, the heavy, intoxicating perfume of fresh-cut blooms. Disoriented, I sat up and found them immediately. 3 perfect gardenias nestled in the hollow my head had left on the pillow, their waxy white petals cool against my fingertips. I stared at them for a full minute, my sleep-fogged mind cycling through explanations. A welcome gift from a neighbor? But I'd met no one in the building. A prank from the previous tenant? But Diane had assured me the apartment had been professionally cleaned and vacant for 6 weeks. I finally decided I must have bought them myself the day before during my furniture shopping frenzy and forgotten in my exhaustion. It was the only rational explanation. I placed the flowers in a glass of water on the windowsill and went about my day. The next morning, it was lilacs, a small bouquet bound with twine, resting precisely where my head had been. These I couldn't explain away. I hadn't left the building since returning from my job hunt the previous afternoon, and the nearest florist was 10 blocks away. My heart began to beat faster as I examined the blooms. They were impossibly fresh, the purple petals unfurling perfectly, stems crisp and unblemished. No florist's tag, no note, just flowers appearing overnight on my pillow like an offering. I spent that day researching the building. The local library's microfiche archives held a century of city newspapers. It took 3 hours of squinting at flickering images before I found it. A brief article from April 1987. Buried on page 14, woman found deceased in Hawthorne Arms apartment. Eleanor Voss, 72, a retired botanist and lifelong resident of apartment 4B, had been discovered by her nephew after failing to answer phone calls for a week. Cause of death. Natural causes. But the article contained a curious detail that made my blood run cold. Ms. Voss was known throughout the neighborhood for her rooftop garden, where she cultivated rare blooms year-round. Neighbors reported receiving fresh-cut flowers on their doorsteps on birthdays and holidays, a tradition Ms. Voss maintained for over 40 years. The article concluded with a quote from the building manager at the time. "She died peacefully in her sleep, but we'll all miss those flowers on our pillows in the morning. She had a way of knowing when someone needed cheering up." Apartment 4B, the one directly above mine, the one I'd been warned not to visit. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old building, the groan of pipes, the whisper of wind through ill-fitting windows, sounded like footsteps overhead. I lay rigid in bed, staring at the willow-shaped stain on the ceiling, imagining an elderly woman moving silently through the apartment above, snipping blossoms from some impossible garden, descending through floors that shouldn't permit passage, placing flowers on my pillow with hands that no longer existed in the physical world. By 4 a.m., exhaustion overtook fear. I fell into a fitful sleep. I woke to roses. Not a bouquet, A single deep crimson rose, its thorns carefully removed, lying across my pillow like a sacrament. Panic finally broke through my rationalizations. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't coincidence. Something was happening in this apartment, and I needed answers. I dressed quickly and went downstairs to the basement-level office where Diane held court amid stacks of unpaid invoices and broken appliances. She was on the phone when I entered, waving me to a chair without looking up. When she hung up, she lit a cigarette before speaking. "Problem with the apartment?" "Who was Eleanor Voss?" I asked directly. Diane's face shuddered instantly. She took a long drag on her cigarette, exhaling smoke toward the water-stained ceiling. "Where'd you hear that name?" "The library archives. She lived in 4B. She died there in 1987. Another drag, a long silence. "Good tenant. Paid rent on time for 43 years, never complained about the roaches or the heat." She stubbed out the cigarette with unnecessary force. "What's this about?" "Flowers keep appearing on my pillow," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound calm. "Fresh flowers, every morning, gardenias, lilacs, roses. It's November. Where would they come from?" Diane went very still. When she looked at me, her eyes held something I hadn't seen before. Not annoyance or boredom, but genuine fear. "You didn't go up there, did you? To 4B? "No, you said not to." "Good." She stood up, walked to a filing cabinet, and rummaged through a drawer before producing a yellowed key attached to a wooden tag marked 4B. "I shouldn't do this. Building code violation. Stairs are unsafe." She handed me the key. Her fingers were cold. "But if you're getting flowers, you should see for yourself. Maybe it'll stop if you understand." The staircase to the 4th floor was narrow and steep, the banister loose in my grip. The door to 4B stood at the end of a short hallway, its paint blistered and peeling. The key turned with a gritty resistance, the lock protesting decades of disuse. When I pushed the door open, the scent hit me first. Not decay or dust, but the overwhelming perfume of 1,000 blooms in full blossom. Apartment 4B was not empty. It was a garden. Every surface bloomed with impossible life. Vines cascaded from the ceiling fixtures, heavy with jasmine and honeysuckle. Roses climbed the walls in riotous profusion, their thorns snagging on faded wallpaper. Orchids spilled from cracked teacups on the mantelpiece. Lilies nodded their heavy heads in corners where floorboards had rotted away to reveal rich, dark soil beneath. The air hummed with the sound of bees in November inside a sealed apartment, and the light filtering through the grimy windows seemed to carry a golden pollen dust that settled on my skin like blessing. But beneath the beauty lay tragedy. In the center of the main room stood a 4-poster bed, its canopy draped with wisteria. And on that bed, propped against pillows, sprouting tiny violets from their seams, sat a skeleton, not scattered or disturbed, arranged with care, the bones still connected by desiccated ligaments, wearing the tattered remains of a floral print dress. The skull rested at a gentle angle, empty sockets gazing toward the ceiling where a magnificent wisteria vine bloomed with impossible purple clusters. In the bony fingers of the right hand rested a pair of pruning shears, their blades still sharp. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. This was Eleanor Voss. She hadn't been discovered by her nephew after a week. She'd been here for 35 years, her body becoming part of the ecosystem she'd cultivated, her bones feeding the roots of the garden she'd refused to abandon even in death. And then I saw the staircase. In the corner of the room, nearly hidden by cascading trumpet vines, a narrow servant stairway spiraled upward through a hole in the ceiling, toward the roof, toward the legendary rooftop garden the newspaper article had mentioned. But as I stared, I realized the truth. The garden wasn't just on the roof. It was everywhere. It had grown downward through floorboards, upward through plaster, sideways through walls. It had consumed this apartment entirely, and its roots surely extended into mine below, into the very ceiling above my bed, where the willow-shaped stain bloomed like a map of its subterranean spread. I fled 4B without touching anything, locking the door behind me and dropping the key into the mail slot of Diane's office on my way out. I didn't return to my apartment until nightfall, my hands still trembling, my mind reeling with what I'd witnessed. I considered packing my bags and leaving immediately. But where would I go? I had no money for another security deposit, no friends with spare rooms. And beneath the terror lurked a strange, unsettling curiosity. Why me? Why these particular flowers? Why the careful placement on my pillow, never on the floor or nightstand, always precisely where my head had rested? That night, I decided to stay awake. I dragged my mattress into the living room as far from the bedroom as possible, and settled in with a book and a pot of strong coffee. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. The building settled around me with its usual symphony of creaks and sighs. At 3:17 a.m. I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound from the bedroom. Not footsteps, something gentler, the whisper of petals brushing against cotton, the faint snip of shears. I didn't move, I barely breathed. The sound lasted perhaps 30 seconds, then ceased. Silence returned, deeper than before. I waited until dawn painted the fire escapes outside my window in shades of rose and gold, before creeping toward the bedroom doorway. I stood there for a full minute, gathering courage, before stepping inside. The mattress had been moved back to its original position beneath the willow stain, and on the pillow rested a single sprig of rosemary, its needles impossibly green and fragrant, a herb of remembrance. I broke down then, not from fear, but from the unbearable tenderness of it. This wasn't a haunting meant to terrify. It was a ritual of care. Eleanor Voss, in her decades of solitude, had made it her purpose to bring beauty to the lives of those around her. Death had not ended that purpose. It had merely transformed its method. The flowers weren't a threat. They were a gift, a lonely ghost's attempt at connection. The next day, I returned to the library. I spent hours digging through archives, piecing together Eleanor's life from obituaries, society pages, and botanical society newsletters. She'd been a respected botanist who'd published 3 books on heirloom roses before retiring in 1965. She'd never married, no children. Her only living relative, the nephew mentioned in the 1987 article, had died himself in 2003, according to his own obituary. She lived alone in 4B for nearly 60 years, her world shrinking to the dimensions of her apartment and rooftop garden until the two became indistinguishable. I also found her final publication, a self-published chapbook from 1986 titled The Language of Forgotten Blooms, a guide to the symbolic meanings of flowers no longer commonly cultivated. I photocopied the relevant pages, gardenias for secret love, lilacs for first emotions of love, roses for deep devotion, rosemary for remembrance. Each flower left on my pillow carried a specific message. But what was she trying to tell me? That evening I made a decision. I went to the grocery store and bought the most beautiful bouquet I could afford. 12 white stargazer lilies, their petals speckled with crimson, their scent powerful enough to fill a room. I carried them upstairs, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. In my apartment, I arranged them carefully in a vase I'd found at a thrift store, then carried the vase into the bedroom and placed it directly beneath the willow-shaped stain on the ceiling. "Thank you," I whispered to the empty room, "for the flowers, for remembering me." I went to bed that night with the vase on my nightstand, the lily's perfume mingling with the lingering scent of rosemary. I fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from days of anxiety. I woke to silence. No flowers on my pillow, no scent of blossoms beyond the lilies I'd placed myself. For a moment, relief flooded me. Perhaps my gesture had been understood. Perhaps the haunting was over. But as I sat up, I noticed something different about the ceiling stain. The willow branches seemed darker, more defined, and at the base of the trunk, where previously there had been only a vague smudge of discoloration, now appeared two distinct shapes. The delicate outline of pruning shears crossed with a trowel. That day, I didn't look for work. I went to a garden center instead and bought potting soil, seeds, and a small terracotta pot. That evening, I planted forget-me-nots on my windowsill, the flower of true love and memories, and watered them carefully before placing the pot beneath the willow stain. The next morning, no flowers appeared on my pillow, but when I looked up at the ceiling, the stain had changed again. The willow now bore tiny buds along its branches, dozens of minute protrusions that hadn't been there before, each one the precise shape of a flower bud waiting to open. A pattern emerged over the following weeks. I would leave offerings, a new plant on the windowsill, a packet of seeds tucked into the vase, once a small watering can I'd found at a flea market. And each night the willow stain would respond, its branches growing more intricate, its form shifting to incorporate the tools and symbols of gardening. It was a conversation conducted in silence and symbolism, a dialogue between the living and the dead, mediated by the language of blooms. I stopped fearing the flowers. I began to look forward to them, not as supernatural intrusions, but as messages from a lonely soul who had found in me someone willing to listen. One rainy Tuesday evening, as I was repotting a peace lily I'd acquired from a neighbor, I heard it for the first time. A sound that wasn't the whisper of petals or the snip of shears. A voice, faint as breath on glass, coming not from above, but from within the walls themselves. "Your hands!" I froze, trowel hovering over the soil. "Your hands remember the earth," the voice continued, so soft I might have imagined it, like mine did. I didn't speak. I simply held my breath and listened. "Show me," the voice whispered. "Show me you remember." Trembling, I pressed my palms into the fresh potting soil, feeling its cool dampness seep between my fingers. I worked the soil gently around the peace lily's roots, patting it firm, my movements slow and deliberate. When I finished, I wiped my hands on a towel and looked up at the ceiling. The willow stain had transformed completely. Where before there had been only branches, now hung hundreds of tiny blossoms, each one a perfect replica of the flowers that had appeared on my pillow these past weeks. Gardenias, lilacs, roses, rosemary, and in the center of the canopy, a single white camellia bloomed larger than the rest, its petals seeming to pulse with a soft inner light. That night, for the first time, I dreamed of her, not as a skeleton in a floral dress, but as she must have been in life. An elderly woman with kind eyes and soil-stained hands, kneeling in a rooftop garden under a sky full of stars. She wasn't speaking to me, but working silently among her plants, her movements graceful and sure. And as I watched, she turned and looked directly at me, not with the empty sockets of a skull, but with eyes full of warmth and recognition. She pointed to a patch of bare earth beside her, then patted the soil twice, a clear invitation. I woke with tears on my cheeks and the scent of night-blooming jasmine thick in the air. On my pillow rested not a flower, but a single seed packet. I picked it up with trembling hands. The label was handwritten in elegant script, Eleanor's Moonflowers, blooms only under starlight. The next evening, as twilight settled over the city, I carried a small trowel and a seed packet up to the roof. The door was unlocked, had been all along, I realized, and the stairs groaned under my weight, but held firm. The rooftop was not the overgrown jungle I'd imagined from 4B's interior. It was a ruin. Cracked concrete, rusted railings, a few stubborn weeds pushing through fissures in the pavement. No garden remained, no trace of the paradise Eleanor Voss had cultivated for 60 years. But in the center of the roof, directly above my bedroom, the concrete had split open in a perfect circle 6 feet across. And from that fissure grew a single plant, a vine with heart-shaped leaves and tightly furled buds the color of pearl. Moonflowers, Eleanor's moonflowers. I knelt beside the plant as true darkness fell. One by one, the buds began to unfurl, their petals opening with an almost audible sigh to reveal blossoms of impossible whiteness that seemed to drink the starlight and glow with their own radiance. And as I watched them bloom, I felt a presence settle beside me, not cold or menacing, but warm as sunlight on soil. I didn't turn to look. I simply sat there in the company of a ghost, both of us gazing at flowers that bloomed only for those who remembered how to see them. The flowers on my pillow stopped after that night. The haunting, if that's what it ever was, had reached its purpose. But sometimes, on clear nights when I can't sleep, I climb to the roof and sit beside the moonflowers as they open beneath the stars. And if I listen closely, I can hear it, the soft whisper of petals in the wind that sounds almost like a voice saying, "Thank you." The building manager never asks why I spend so much time on the roof. Diane retired last spring, and the new manager doesn't care as long as the rent clears. The other tenants occasionally leave small offerings on their windowsills, a packet of seeds, a watering can left out after rain, and sometimes in the morning they find a single perfect bloom waiting for them. A silent exchange, a tradition renewed. I still live in 3B. I've hung shelves on the bedroom wall beneath the willow stain, filling them with books on botany and horticulture. The stain itself has faded over the years, its branches softening into abstraction until only I can still see the shape of the tree within the discoloration. But on certain mornings, when the light strikes the ceiling at just the right angle, I can still make out the faint impression of pruning shears crossed with a trowel, and sometimes, if I look very closely, the delicate outline of two figures kneeling side by side in a garden that exists nowhere and everywhere at once. Last week, a young couple moved into 2B below me. The woman is an artist. The man teaches poetry at the community college. They seem kind, lonely in the particular way of newcomers to a city that doesn't yet know their names. This morning, as I was leaving for work, I saw her standing in the hallway looking lost, a single suitcase at her feet, while her partner sorted through a box of kitchenware inside their apartment. I went upstairs to my apartment, selected a cutting from the peace lily that now thrives on my windowsill, and placed it in a small pot with fresh soil. I carried it down to 2B and knocked softly on their door. When she opened it, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and uncertainty, I simply handed her the plant. "For your windowsill," I said. "It likes the morning light." She took it with trembling hands, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "How did you know I needed this?" I didn't answer. I just smiled and walked away, already thinking about the seed packets I'd bought yesterday. Zinnias for friendship, lavender for devotion, sunflowers for adoration, small offerings, simple gestures, the language of blooms passed down through generations of lonely souls learning to reach across the chasms that separate us. Some ghosts don't rattle chains or whisper threats in the dark. Some simply leave flowers on your pillow to remind you that beauty persists. That connection is possible even across the greatest divides. That no one need remain alone if someone is willing to plant seeds in the dark and wait for them to bloom. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, when the moonflowers on the roof are closed tight against the coming light, I like to imagine Eleanor Voss, not as a skeleton in a floral dress, but as she is now, a presence woven into the very fabric of this building, her hands still tending the garden she loved, her heart still reaching out through roots and stems and petals to touch the lives of those who remember how to receive a gift left gently on a pillow in the night. And that is the end of this story. Now let's begin a new one. The hotel clerk gave me room 13, then whispered, "Don't answer if it knocks twice." Rain lashed against the windshield as I pulled into the gravel lot of the Blackwood Inn just past midnight, the wipers struggling to keep pace with the downpour. The GPS had rerouted me 3 times thanks to washed-out back roads, and what should have been a 4-hour drive from the city had stretched into 7 hours of white-knuckle navigating through storm-slicked mountain passes. My eyes burned with exhaustion, my neck stiff from hours hunched over the steering wheel. The Blackwood Inn wasn't my intended stop. It hadn't even been on my original route. But when the last gas station attendant warned me about the bridge out ahead and pointed toward the flickering neon vacancy sign in the distance, I didn't hesitate. Any roof was better than none. The lobby was dimly lit and smelled of mildew and old wood smoke. A single bulb hung above the check-in desk, casting long shadows across peeling floral wallpaper. Behind the counter stood a man who looked as weathered as the building itself, deep lines carved around his eyes, hair more silver than gray, fingers stained yellow from decades of cigarettes, though no ashtray was visible. He didn't look up as I approached, his attention fixed on a ledger open before him, pen scratching slowly across the page. "Room for the night?" I asked, my voice rough from disuse. He nodded without speaking, still writing. When he finally set the pen down, he slid a brass key across the counter toward me. It was cold and heavy, the number 13 stamped into its head. "Room 13, he said, his voice a dry rasp like stones grinding together. "End of the hall on the left." I reached for the key, but before my fingers could close around it, his hand shot out and gripped my wrist. His skin was papery thin, surprisingly strong. He leaned forward, his breath smelling faintly of peppermint and something else, something metallic like old blood. His eyes, pale blue and unnervingly sharp, locked onto mine. "Don't answer if it knocks twice," he whispered, so low I almost missed it over the drum and rain outside. Then he released my wrist and stepped back, his expression shut and closed, as if the moment had never happened. "Checkout's at 11. I stood there for a second, stunned, the words echoing in my skull. Don't answer if it knocks twice. Not someone. It. Before I could ask what he meant, he'd turned away, busying himself with the ledger again, effectively dismissing me. My exhaustion warred with a prickle of unease, but logic won out. Old hotels had quirks. Superstitious staff. Probably just a local ghost story he told all the guests for kicks. I pocketed the key and headed for the stairs. The hallway on the second floor was narrow and poorly lit, the carpet threadbare and damp underfoot. Room 13 was exactly where he'd said. End of the hall, door painted a chipped black that seemed to absorb the weak light from the single fixture overhead. The key turned with a gritty resistance, the lock protesting decades of use. Inside the room was smaller than I expected, but clean enough. A narrow bed with a faded quilt, a scarred wooden dresser, a single armchair by the window overlooking the storm-ravaged parking lot. The air smelled stale but not unpleasant, like old books and lemon polish. I dropped my duffel bag by the door and collapsed onto the bed fully clothed, too tired to care about sheets or pajamas. Sleep hit me like a physical blow. I woke to darkness and silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie stillness that pressed against the windows like a held breath. My phone read 2:47 a.m. I needed to pee. As I swung my legs off the bed, I heard it, a knock at the door, soft, polite. 3 quick raps. I froze. Who would be knocking at this hour? Housekeeping? Unlikely. Another guest? Possible, but why my room? I stayed silent, listening. After a full minute of quiet, I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Shrugging it off as a dream fragment bleeding into wakefulness, I used the bathroom down the hall and returned to my room, locking the deadbolt this time. I was drifting back to sleep when I heard it again. Knock, knock. 2 raps, deliberate, measured, exactly 2 seconds apart. My blood turned to ice. Don't answer if it knocks twice. I lay perfectly still in the dark, every muscle locked, my breath shallow and silent. The knocking didn't repeat. No doorknob rattled, no voice called out. Just silence, stretching taut and thin. After 10 minutes, I allowed myself to relax slightly. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the old pipes groaning, maybe my own imagination conjuring horrors from exhaustion. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I noticed something I hadn't before. Above the bed, centered perfectly on the water-stained plaster, someone had scratched a series of symbols into the wall. Not graffiti. These were precise, almost ritualistic. A circle bisected by a vertical line, surrounded by 7 smaller dots arranged in a crescent shape. Beneath them, carved so deeply the plaster dust had collected in the grooves, were the numbers. 13. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, I packed my bag quickly and headed downstairs to settle my bill. The lobby was empty, except for a young woman wiping down the front desk with a rag that looked dirtier than the surface it was cleaning. She smiled brightly when she saw me. "Checking out already? You barely slept." "Yeah, well, long drive ahead," I said, forcing a smile. "Listen, about room 13. Is there anything I should know? The clerk last night, he said something strange about knocking." Her smile faltered. She glanced toward the back office, then lowered her voice. "Old man Hargrove, he's superstitious. Pays attention to things most folks don't." She leaned closer, her eyes darting nervously. "Room 13's always been odd. Guests complain about noises, cold spots. One woman swore she saw a figure standing in the corner watching her sleep. But the real trouble started after Eleanor." "Eleanor?" She nodded, twisting the rag in her hands. "Eleanor Voss. Stayed in room 13 back in '89. Never checked out. They found her 3 days later dead in the bed. Heart failure, they said. But," she hesitated, "but the coroner's report mentioned something weird. Her hands were clenched so tight around the bed sheets they had to pry her fingers loose, and her eyes, they said her eyes were fixed on the door like she'd seen something terrifying right before she died." A chill crawled up my spine. "Did they ever figure out what she saw?" The girl shook her head. "No, but after that, guests started reporting knocks at the door, always 2 knocks, and if they answered—" She trailed off, her face paling. "3 people disappeared from that room over the next decade, just vanished. Left all their stuff behind. Suitcases unzipped, wallets on the dresser. The police stopped investigating after a while. Said it was coincidence. But old man Hargrove, he knows. That's why he tells people not to answer if it knocks twice." I left the Blackwood Inn without looking back, the image of those carved symbols burning in my mind. I drove straight to the county records office in the nearest town, spending the afternoon digging through archived newspapers and death certificates. What I found chilled me deeper than any ghost story. Eleanor Voss hadn't just died of heart failure, she'd been running. From what? The records didn't say. She'd checked into the Blackwood Inn under a false name, paid cash for a week's stay, and kept to herself. The night she died, the only other guest in the hotel was a man registered as J. Smith, a name so common it was meaningless. He'd checked out the morning after Eleanor's body was discovered, leaving no forwarding address. But the real revelation came from a microfiche article buried in a 1990 issue of the local paper, a follow-up piece mentioning that Eleanor Voss had been a historian specializing in Appalachian folk magic. Her final research project, according to colleagues, involved protective sigils used to ward off entities that mimic human behavior to gain entry to homes. The symbols above my bed, the circle, the line, the 7 dots, matched descriptions from her unpublished notes. A ward, a desperate, last-minute attempt to protect herself. That night, safe in a chain motel 50 miles away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I double-checked the locks, pushed a chair under the doorknob, and slept with the lights on. But at 2:47 a.m., I woke to the sound of rain against a window and 2 soft knocks at the door. Knock, knock. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocking didn't repeat. But when I checked the peephole, the hallway was empty, except for a single, waterlogged business card lying on the carpet. I didn't pick it up. I knew what it would say. Blackwood Inn. Vacancy. I moved cities after that. Changed my number. Avoided old hotels, especially ones with flickering neon signs. But sometimes, on rainy nights when the power flickers and the house settles into silence, I hear it again. 2 knocks, polite, patient, waiting. And I remember old man Hargrove's grip on my wrist, his breath smelling of peppermint and old blood, his pale eyes boring into mine as he whispered the warning that saved my life. Don't answer if it knocks twice. Because whatever knocked on my door that night in room 13 wasn't human. It was something that learned from its mistakes. Something that realized doors can be opened from the inside if you just convince the occupant to invite you in. And now wherever I go, it follows. Not as a shadow or a specter, but as a possibility. A knock in the dark. A choice waiting to be made. I never answer, not once, not ever. But I wonder sometimes how long it will keep trying, how many doors it will knock on before it finds someone who doesn't know the rule, someone who, in their loneliness or curiosity or simple exhaustion, turns the knob and lets it in. And I wonder what it does to them after that. As this story comes to rest, a new whisper begins. The house doesn't want us here, and it shows us every night. The realtor called it a fixer-upper with character. Mom called it a fresh start after Dad walked out, taking his paycheck and his promises, leaving us with eviction notices and the hollow echo of our old apartment. The house on Hemlock Lane didn't look evil in the daylight, just tired. A 2-story Victorian with peeling paint the color of dried blood, sagging porches held up by splintered beams, and windows so grimy they looked like cataracts clouding its eyes. The price, $150,000 for a 5-bedroom with a wraparound porch, was a miracle after the city auctioned it off, following the previous owner's suicide. "Eccentric fellow," the realtor had murmured, avoiding our eyes as she handed Mom the keys. "Lived alone for 30 years, died in the master bedroom. Heart failure, they say." She paused at the overgrown gate, her smile tight. "Just keep the basement door locked, and maybe avoid the 3rd-floor nursery. Kids get nightmares in old houses." She drove off before Mom could ask why. We moved in on a Tuesday. Boxes littered the dusty floors of rooms that smelled of mildew and forgotten time. 10-year-old Lily skipped ahead, already claiming the smallest bedroom with the chipped floral wallpaper. "It's perfect, Mom," she chirped, swinging her stuffed rabbit by its ear. I was 12, old enough to feel the weight of the house settling around us like a shroud. The air was unnaturally still, thick and cold despite the August heat outside. Every footstep echoed too loudly. Every door groaned like it was reluctant to open. Mom forced cheer into her voice, unpacking dishes with trembling hands. "It just needs love, girls. We'll fill it with laughter." But the silence that followed her words wasn't peaceful. It was watchful, waiting. That first night, the house spoke. I woke at 2:11 a.m. to the sound of dripping, not in the bathroom, in the hallway outside my room. Plink, plink, plink. Slow, deliberate. I crept to my door, pressing my ear to the wood. The dripping stopped. Then a new sound, a low, wet gurgle like mud bubbling in a drain, and beneath it, a whisper that wasn't a voice but a vibration in the floorboards. Go. I flung open my door. The hallway was empty. But the floorboards glistened with dark, viscous liquid that smelled of river clay and rotting leaves. It seeped from beneath the basement door, a heavy, scarred thing with a tarnished padlock hanging open. Mom had locked it that afternoon. I hadn't touched it. The puddles spread toward Lily's room, pooling under her door. I mopped it up with towels, my hands shaking, and jammed a chair under the basement door handle. When I checked Lily's room, she was asleep, her face peaceful. But her stuffed rabbit lay on the floor, soaked through, one button eye missing. Mom dismissed it. Old pipes, she said at breakfast, stirring her coffee too hard. Or a leaky roof. We'll call a plumber. But her knuckles were white on the mug. Lily didn't mention the rabbit. She just stared out the window at the overgrown garden, her small shoulders hunched. The flowers are sad, she whispered. They say the dirt is hungry. The house escalated. That night, the dripping returned, louder, accompanied by scratching, not mice, but long, deliberate scrapes like fingernails dragging down the inside of the walls. Scritch, scritch, scritch. I found Lily's bedroom door locked from the inside at dawn. When I finally got it open, she was sitting cross-legged on the floor, crayons scattered around her. She'd drawn the same picture over and over, a tall, crooked house with black windows. In front, 3 stick figures, Mom, me, Lily, were drawn in red crayon floating upward like smoke. The house had a mouth, wide, grinning, at the bottom in wobbly letters. It wants us gone. Mom tried to laugh it off. Just a nightmare, sweetie. But that afternoon, while unpacking the kitchen, I saw it. The wallpaper in the hall wasn't just peeling, it was bleeding. Thick, rust-colored streaks oozed from the seams, forming words in jagged, dripping letters. Leave while you can. The smell of copper filled the air. I scrubbed it until my hands were raw. By evening, it was gone. But the words were etched into my mind. The basement door became the heart of it. No matter how many chairs I wedged under the handle, no matter how many new locks Mom installed, it would swing open by dawn. The cold that poured out wasn't just chill, it was a physical force, stealing breath, frosting the doorknob. One morning, frost coated the entire 3rd stair, and on it, written in condensation, "Your tears taste like salt." Then came the photographs. Mom kept our family albums in a box under her bed. One rainy Thursday, Lily pulled one out, giggling. "Look, we're happy." But the photos had changed. In every picture, birthdays, vacations, school plays, the house loomed in the background. Its windows weren't dark. They were eyes, glowing faintly. And in the last photo, taken just last month at the city park, our smiles were frozen, but behind us, the skeletal branches of a dead oak formed the unmistakable shape of a pointing finger aimed directly at our backs. At the bottom of the box, a new photo lay face down. I turned it over. It showed our new house at twilight. On the porch stood 3 figures, Mom, Lily, and me, but our faces were blurred smudges of shadow. Only our eyes were visible, wide, terrified, and scrawled across the bottom in what looked like dried mud. "Stay and starve." Mom finally broke down. She called the realtor, her voice cracking. "What aren't you telling me?" The realtor's sigh was audible even to me, standing 3 feet away. The owner, Mr. Hargrave, he wasn't eccentric. He was afraid. His wife and daughter vanished here in 1999. No note, no signs of struggle. Just gone. Hargrave claimed the house took them, said it fed on loneliness. After he died, the bank cleared out the place. They found things, Sarah, things buried under floorboards. Dolls with their faces scratched off, jars of salt, nails bent backward, and on every mirror, the same words. It watches. It waits. The line went dead before Mom could respond. That night, the house showed us why we shouldn't stay. It started with the lights. All at once, every bulb in the house blew out, not with a pop, but a sigh, plunging us into total darkness. Lily's scream cut through the silence. "Mom, it's in my room. The shadow on the wall, it's moving." I ran to her, stumbling over boxes in the pitch black. Moonlight bled through her window, painting the room in shades of bone. The shadow on the far wall wasn't cast by anything in the room. It was a hunched, skeletal shape, its elongated fingers stretching toward Lily's bed. As I watched, frozen, it turned its head, a smooth, impossible rotation, and its shadow eyes fixed on mine. The vibration filled the air, deeper now, shaking the floorboards. She'll be next, like the other girl. Mom burst in with a flashlight. The shadow vanished, but the words hung in the cold air. Lily sobbed into Mom's shoulder. It said my name, Mommy. It called me Emily. Emily, Hargrave's daughter. We huddled in the living room, flashlights trembling in our hands. The house groaned around us, a symphony of settling beams and shifting wood. But beneath it, a new sound, a slow, rhythmic thumping from the basement. Thump, 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 like a giant sleeping heart. Then water began to seep under the basement door, not the thick, earthy sludge from before, clear, cold, rising fast. Within minutes, it lapped at our ankles. The smell of chlorine cut through the damp. "It's flooding," Mom gasped, grabbing Lily. I yanked open the front door. The porch steps were gone. Where they should have been, the ground had collapsed into a deep, muddy sinkhole filled with swirling black water. Our escape was sealed. The water rose to our knees. The thumping grew louder, shaking the walls. Plaster rained from the ceiling. The vibration wasn't just in the air now. It was in our bones, a deep, guttural growl that wasn't language, but pure hatred. You belong to the dirt, like the others. Mom made a decision. She waded toward the stairs, Lily clinging to her neck. "The attic," she gasped. "It's the highest point." We splashed up the steps, the water chasing us like a living thing. The thumping followed, louder with every step, shaking the banister. On the second-floor landing, the wallpaper bulged outward, splitting open with a wet tear. Dark roots, thick as wrists, slick with mud, snaked out, grasping at our ankles. They didn't burn, they clung, icy and strong, pulling us toward the tear in the wall. Behind it wasn't lath and plaster. It was earth, damp, black soil, smelling of graves. And deep within it, two small white shapes gleamed, a child's shoe, a woman's bracelet. I screamed, kicking free. Mom grabbed Lily and lunged for the attic stairs. The roots followed, slithering up the wall, tearing more wallpaper away. The attic door was padlocked. A flimsy thing Hargrave must have added. I smashed it open with a fire poker from the hall closet. We tumbled inside, slamming the door shut just as the roots thudded against the wood. The attic was freezing. Moonlight streamed through a single dusty window, illuminating trunks draped in sheets and cobwebs thick as lace. But on the far wall, something glowed faintly. Not mold, not paint. Words etched into the wood itself, pulsing with a sickly green light. "Bury the lonely. Feed the foundation." Lily pointed, trembling. "Look." In the corner, half hidden under a rotting quilt, sat two small, crude dolls, one dressed in a yellow dress, one in a floral apron. Their faces were scribbled over with charcoal, but pinned to their chests were tiny, faded photographs. A smiling woman with Mom's eyes, a little girl with Lily's freckles. Their names were stitched beneath the photos in fraying thread. Martha. Emily. Hargrave hadn't just lost them. He'd tried to feed them to the house, to buy time. The roots thudded harder against the attic door. Wood splintered. A thick, mudded tendril snaked through the crack, reaching for Lily. Mom grabbed a rusted ice axe from a trunk and hacked at it. The root recoiled, oozing black fluid that smelled of decay. "It wants our sadness," she whispered, her voice raw. "It feeds on it. That's why it shows us these things. It's tasting us." I remembered a note from the realtor's folder, the one about Hargrave's journals. It hungers for the spaces between heartbeats. The house didn't just want us gone. It wanted us broken. It wanted Mom's grief over Dad, my fear of being unlovable, Lily's confusion about why her father left. It was drinking our pain like wine. The door groaned. More roots burst through, lashing like whips. One wrapped around Mom's wrist, yanking her toward the splintered wood. Lily screamed. I didn't think. I ran to the glowing words on the wall. "Bury the lonely, feed the foundation." I pressed my palms against the wood. "You don't get us," I shouted, tears freezing on my cheeks. "You don't get our sadness. We're not lonely. We have each other." Silence. The thudding stopped. The roots froze mid-lash. The green glow on the wall flickered. For a heartbeat, the house held its breath. Then, a new vibration, not the growl, but something thin, almost human. A whisper from the walls themselves. "Liar!" The roots surged forward. Mom cried out as the one around her wrist tightened. Lily stumbled back, tripping over a trunk. Her head hit the floorboards with a sickening crack. She didn't move. Something in me snapped. Not fear, rage, pure white-hot fury at this thing that had taken everything from us, our home, our safety, our father, and now wanted to take Lily too. I grabbed the ice axe from Mom's limp hand, not to cut the roots, to smash the wall. I swung with all my strength. The axe head bit deep into the wood where the glowing words pulsed. Splinters flew. Black liquid gushed from the wound in the wall, sizzling like acid. The vibration became a shriek, a sound of tearing stone and snapping roots. The entire house shook. Dust rained from the rafters. The roots shriveled, blackening and crumbling to ash at our feet. The water flooding the lower floors drained away with a wet, sucking sound. Moonlight fell on Lily's still face. Mom crawled to her, sobbing, "Lily, oh God, Lily!" Lily's eyes fluttered open. "Mommy," she whispered, "it's quiet now." Dawn painted the attic window pink. The house was silent, truly silent. No dripping, no scratching, no vibration in the floor. The green words on the wall were gone. Only a deep gash in the wood remained, oozing a clear, watery sap that smelled faintly of pine. We didn't sleep in the house that day. We sat on the porch steps, repaired overnight, the sinkhole filled with fresh soil, as if the house had spat us out. Mr. Finch, the realtor, arrived at noon. his face pale. "The locks on the basement door were melted," he said, not meeting our eyes. "The foundation, it's stable, stronger than it's been in years." He handed Mom a thick envelope. Hargrave's estate lawyer called, said Hargrave left a letter for the next family who stayed. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting spidery and weak. I fed it my grief. I fed it my daughter's laughter. I fed it my wife's tears. It only grew hungrier. It doesn't want you gone. It wants you broken. It wants the hollow places inside you. Don't give it your sadness. Give it your rage. Give it your love. That's the only thing it can't digest. That's the only thing that makes it bleed. We stayed. We patched the gash in the attic wall with fresh wood. We replanted the garden where the sinkhole had been. We painted Lily's room sunshine yellow. The house still groans. Pipes still clank. But the cold spots are gone. The dripping only happens when it rains. Some nights, when the moon is full, I sit on the repaired porch with Mom and Lily. We drink hot chocolate and watch the fireflies blink over the new flower beds. The house breathes around us a slow, deep rhythm that's almost peaceful. But sometimes, in the deepest quiet, I feel it, a faint vibration in the floorboards. Not a growl, a hum, almost like a lullaby. And if I press my palm to the porch railing, the wood is warm, not with heat, with something like contentment. Lily doesn't draw grim reaper houses anymore. Last week, she showed me a new picture. Our house, but with smiling suns in every window. 3 stick figures stand on the porch, holding hands. At the bottom, in careful letters, "We feed it joy now." Mom kissed the top of her head. "That's right, sweetie. I know the truth, though. The house is still hungry. It always will be. But we learned its rules. We don't lock our grief away in dark corners where it can fester. We let it out. In tears on the porch swing, in arguments at the dinner table, in Mom's quiet sobs when she thinks we're asleep. And then we drown it in noise, in Lily's laughter when she chases fireflies, in Mom humming off-key while she cooks, in movie nights on the couch, blankets tangled, sharing a single bowl of popcorn. The house takes it all, the sadness, the joy. It drinks deep. But it doesn't feast on us anymore. It lives with us. A tenant in the walls, a guest at our table. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the kitchen at night, I whisper to the shadows in the corners, "You want my loneliness? Come take it. But you'll have to get through Mom's pot roast first, and Lily's knock-knock jokes." The shadows don't answer, but the lights don't flicker. The floorboards don't creak, and the air stays warm. Last Tuesday, Lily left a plate of cookies on the porch steps. "For the house," she said solemnly. By morning, the cookies were gone. Only crumbs remained, and in the dew on the railing, written as if by a fingertip, "Thank you." Mom saw it. She didn't scream. She just smiled, a real one this time, and refilled the plate. We're not safe. Not really. But we're not prey anymore. The house doesn't want us gone. It wants us here. Whole, loud, fighting. Because a heart that beats with love, even broken love, is harder to swallow than one that's already hollow. At night, when Lily sleeps soundly in her yellow room, I sit on the porch swing. The house sighs around me, a deep, settling sound, like roots sinking into good earth. I rest my hand on the warm wood of the railing. "Stay full," I whisper into the dark, "but don't you dare forget who feeds you." The wind rustles the new leaves on the oak tree where the pointing branch once grew. The house doesn't answer. It just holds us tight. For now, that's enough. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. The house that remembers. I am writing this from a borrowed laptop in a library in Duluth, Minnesota. I don't have a phone anymore. I don't have a car. I walked here in the snow wearing boots that aren't mine. If you're reading this and you see a listing on Airbnb for a secluded historic manor in the Blackwoods with a host named Mrs. Gable, do not book it. Do not even look at the photos. The photos are a lie, but not in the way you think. The photos show the house as it wants to be seen. They don't show what it keeps in the walls. My name is Sarah. I'm a freelance photographer, or I was. I specialize in architectural photography, abandoned places, ruins, the kind of decay porn that gets likes on Instagram. I was broke, my camera gear was pawned, and I needed a gig. When I got the email from a private client offering me $5,000 to document a family estate before it was demolished, I jumped at it. The client, a lawyer named Mr. Sterling, was vague. "The house has history," he said on the phone. His voice was tinny, like he was speaking from inside a metal box. "The family wants a record of it, every room, every corner, but you must do it at night. The lighting is specific." "At night?" I asked. "Yes, the house wakes up at night. The architecture changes with the shadows. It's an aesthetic choice." I agreed. I rented a car, bought back my camera, and drove north. The house was located at the end of a long, overgrown driveway that wound through a forest of dead birch trees. They looked like white bones sticking out of the earth. The house itself was a monstrosity. It was Victorian, but wrong. The angles were too sharp. The windows were too narrow, like squinting eyes. It was painted a color that might have been blue once, but had rotted into a bruised purple. Mr. Sterling wasn't there. He had left a key under the mat, a heavy iron key that felt cold enough to burn my skin. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. It wasn't mold or dust. It smelled like dried flowers and old perfume, masking something underneath, something like raw meat left in the sun. The interior was pristine, dust-free. The furniture was draped in white sheets. The mirrors were covered with black cloth. I set up my gear in the foyer. It was 8 p.m. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the floorboards. I started shooting. Click, flash, whir. The first hour was normal. I moved from room to room, the library, the dining hall, the parlor. The house was beautiful in a grotesque way. The wallpaper was patterned with intricate vines that looked like arteries. The chandeliers were made of crystal drops that resembled tears. But as midnight approached, the house changed. I was in the kitchen. It was a large tiled room with a massive cast iron stove. I was setting up my tripod to capture the stove when I heard it. Clink. It sounded like silverware hitting a plate. I froze. "Hello?" Silence. I looked around. The kitchen was empty. The drawers were closed. Clink. Scrape. It came from the dining room, the room I had just left. I grabbed my tripod, wielding it like a club, and walked slowly to the dining room doorway. The room was dark. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom. The table, which had been empty 10 minutes ago, was set. There were 4 place settings: fine china, crystal goblets, silver cutlery arranged perfectly, and in the center of the table there was a roast, a steaming, hot roast beef, oozing red juices onto a silver platter. My breath caught in my throat. I was alone. I had locked the door. I walked closer. The heat from the meat hit my face. It was real. I raised my camera. I had to document this. Click! The flash illuminated the room for a split second. In that split second, I saw them. Seated at the 4 chairs were figures. They were translucent, like smoke caught in glass. A man, a woman, and 2 children. They were dressed in clothes from the 1900s, but their faces were blurred, smudged, like someone had taken an eraser to a pencil drawing. Where their eyes and mouths should be, there was just smooth gray skin. The flash died. Darkness returned. I shined my flashlight at the chairs. Empty. The food was still there. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Okay," I whispered. "Prank. Someone is messing with me." I turned to run to the front door. It was gone. Where the front door had been, there was now a wall, a solid wall covered in the artery-patterned wallpaper. I touched it. It was cold and damp. It felt like skin. I ran to the windows. They were shuttered from the outside. I tried to lift the sash, painted shut. I smashed the glass with my tripod. Behind the glass there was no outside. There were bricks, a solid wall of bricks. I was sealed in. Then the whispering started. It came from the vents, from the floorboards, from the walls themselves. She sees us. She sees the dinner. Does she want a plate? She looks hungry. I ran up the stairs. Why? I don't know. Instinct. High ground. I barricaded myself in the master bedroom. It had a heavy oak door with a bolt lock. I slid the bolt home and pushed a dresser in front of it. I sat on the bed, shaking. I checked my photos on the camera's display screen. The photo of the dining room. In the picture, the chairs were empty, but the roast beef wasn't meat. It was a human head, a severed gray head on a platter, and it was screaming. I dropped the camera. It hit the floor and the lens shattered. I huddled in the corner. "This isn't real. This isn't real." Knock, knock, knock. 3 polite taps on the bedroom door. "Room service," a voice called. It was a cheerful sing-song voice, a maid's voice. "Go away," I screamed. "But you didn't finish your dinner, miss," the voice said. "The master is offended." The doorknob rattled, slowly, then violently. The heavy dresser began to slide across the floor. Something with immense strength was pushing the door open. I looked around the room. There was a fireplace, a chimney. It was my only way out. I grabbed the fire poker and ran to the hearth. I looked up. It was dark, narrow, and smelled of soot. The bedroom door splintered. A hand reached through. It was gray, elongated, with fingers that had too many joints. I climbed into the fireplace. I pulled myself up onto the smoke shelf. I heard the door smash open. I heard heavy, wet footsteps enter the room. "Where is the little mouse?" a deep, guttural voice growled. "She went up the chimney, sir," the maid's voice giggled. "Smoke her out," the deep voice said. I heard the strike of a match, then the whoosh of flames. Heat surged up the chimney. Smoke billowed around me. I coughed, my eyes burning. I climbed. I clawed at the rough bricks, tearing my fingernails. The heat was scorching the soles of my boots. I climbed until I saw stars. I pulled myself out onto the roof. I collapsed on the cold slate tiles, gasping for air. The smoke poured out of the chimney next to me, thick and black. I looked down. It was a 30-foot drop to the ground, But the ground was moving. The lawn wasn't grass, it was a sea of hands. Thousands of gray, spectral hands reaching up from the earth, grasping at the air. "Jump," they whispered. "Join us." I looked around the roof. There was a trellis on the side of the house, covered in dead vines. I crawled to it. I swung my legs over the edge. As I climbed down, I looked into the windows on the second floor. In every window, a face was watching me. The smudged faces, the eraser people, they were pressing against the glass, their featureless heads tracking my movement. And behind them, in the hallway, stood a tall shadow. It wore a top hat. It held a silver platter. I reached the ground. The spectral hands grabbed at my boots, but they were weak, misty. I kicked through them. I ran to my car. I fumbled for my keys. They were gone. I must have dropped them inside. I looked at the car. The tires were slashed, all four of them, and on the hood, scratched into the paint, were words, "Stay for dessert." I didn't stop. I ran into the woods. I ran until my lungs burned. I ran until the sun came up. I found a road. A truck driver picked me up. He didn't ask questions about the soot or the blood or the fact that I was crying hysterically. He dropped me off here in Duluth. I went to the police. I told them everything. They looked up the address I gave them. "Ma'am," the officer said gently, "there is no house at that location. That's the old Blackwood fire zone. A manor burned down there in 1922. Killed the whole family. They say the father went mad and poisoned them at dinner before setting the place alight." "I was there," I insisted. "I have photos." I reached for my camera bag. It was empty. The camera was gone. I had dropped it in the bedroom, but I found something else in the bag, a silver fork. It was heavy, tarnished antique silver, and engraved on the handle was a name, Sterling, the lawyer, the client. He wasn't a lawyer, he was one of them. I left the station. I pawned the fork for cash. That's how I'm surviving. But here is why I am writing this. Here is why I am terrified. Yesterday, I bought a disposable camera to take photos for a new job listing I found. Landscape work, safe work. I developed a film at a 1-hour photo lab. The first 12 photos were just trees and lakes. But the last photo, I didn't take the last photo. It shows me, sleeping. In the motel room I stayed in last night, I'm asleep in the bed. And standing over me, looking down at my face, are the 4 smudged figures, the family, and in the corner of the room, reflected in the mirror, is the tall shadow with the top hat. He is holding a silver platter, and on the platter there is a camera lens. My broken camera lens. They followed me. They are not bound to the house. The house is just where they eat. And they are still hungry. I am leaving this laptop here. I am leaving this town. I don't know where I'm going. Somewhere crowded, somewhere bright. But I know it won't matter, because just now, as I was typing this, the librarian walked by. She smiled at me, but for a split second, her face blurred. Her eyes and mouth disappeared, leaving only smooth gray skin. And she whispered, in a voice that sounded like silverware on a plate, "Dinner is served." And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. The old woman in the window has been dead for 30 years. I should have listened to the realtor. Not the slick, too smooth one with the practiced smile who showed me the listing, but the ancient woman who ran the corner store 2 blocks down. The one whose eyes widened like saucers when I mentioned I'd just signed the lease on 47 Willow Creek Lane. She dropped the jar of pickles she was stocking, the shatter echoing in her tiny, cluttered shop. "That house?" she'd hissed, her voice barely a whisper, her gnarled hands trembling as she wiped vinegar off the floor with a rag that looked older than the building itself. "Child, you best turn right around. That house, it's got eyes. And the one in the window, she ain't blinking for nobody." Before I could ask what she meant, she'd shooed me out, muttering about bad bones and old debts, refusing to take my money for the soda I'd picked up. I'd laughed it off. Superstitious nonsense. Desperation for affordable rent in this city makes you dismiss a lot of red flags, especially when the apartment is miraculously perfect. A spacious, sun-drenched studio on the third floor of a quiet, if slightly shabby brick building for half the market rate. The landlord, a nervous, bird-like man named Mr. Henderson, had practically thrust the keys into my hands, avoiding eye contact, mumbling about cleaning the place thoroughly and keeping the shades drawn at night. I didn't think much of it. Everyone has quirks. The apartment itself was lovely, high ceilings, original hardwood floors, a large window overlooking a secluded, overgrown courtyard. It felt like a sanctuary after months of noisy roommates and crumbling studio walls. I unpacked my meager belongings, hanging my few photos, setting up my laptop on the small desk. The only oddity was the window. The previous tenant must have left the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight. I pulled them back with a flourish, eager to let in the afternoon light, and that's when I saw her. Directly across the narrow courtyard, in the window of the identical building facing mine, stood an old woman. She was impossibly thin, draped in a faded floral housecoat that hung loosely on her frame. Her white hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was a road map of deep wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp, alert, and fixed directly on me, unblinkingly. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just watched. I offered a hesitant neighborly wave. Nothing, not a flicker of recognition, just that steady, unnerving gaze. I shrugged it off. Eccentric neighbor, maybe hard of hearing. I turned back to unpacking, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. It intensified. Every time I glanced towards the window, she was there, standing in the exact same spot, in the same pose, staring. At dusk, I drew my own curtains, seeking privacy for the night. The next morning, when I opened them, she was already there, waiting. This became the pattern. Dawn, noon, dusk. She was a fixture in that window, a silent sentinel. It was unsettling, but not overtly threatening, just persistent. The first real chill came 3 days in. I was making coffee, glancing idly across the courtyard. The old woman was gone. The window was empty. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a pang of irrational guilt. Had I been rude? Too dismissive? I peered closer. The apartment beyond the window seemed dark, neglected, dusty, unlived in. That afternoon, driven by a mix of curiosity and unease, I took a walk around the block. The building opposite mine, 49 Willow Creek Lane, looked abandoned. Boards covered some lower windows. The front door was chained shut with a heavy padlock thick with rust. Mail overflowed from a cracked box. No sign of life, no sign of the old woman. Confused, I went back to my apartment. As I unlocked my door, I glanced up at 49 Willow Creek. My blood turned to ice. She was back, standing in the window, staring straight at me. Her expression seemed reproachful. How? The building was sealed shut. I ran downstairs, pounding on the chained front door of 49. No answer. I peered through a grimy ground floor window. The interior was dark, filled with shrouded furniture and layers of dust. Definitely empty. I asked a passing mail carrier. He shook his head. That place. Been vacant since Mrs. Gable died, 30 years ago last November. Heart attack, they say. Found her right there in that front room by the window. He pointed. Never rented it out since. Owner's scared of it, I reckon. Mrs. Gable, dead for 30 years. I stumbled back to my apartment, my legs weak. It was impossible. A trick of the light? A shared hallucination? But the details were too sharp, too consistent. The floral housecoat, the severe bun, the unblinking, watchful eyes. That night, I drew my curtains tight and didn't open them for 2 days. I worked from home, ordered, groceries delivered, convinced myself I'd imagined it all, a stress-induced mirage. On the third night, the power went out. A city-wide blackout, the radio said. My phone flashlight was weak, casting long, dancing shadows. I needed air. I cracked my front door, stepping into the dimly lit hallway just as the emergency lights flickered on, and I looked up. Across the courtyard, 49 Willow Creek was pitch black. All windows dark, except one, the window of the front room. It glowed with a soft, steady yellow light, like a single lamp had been turned on, and in that pool of light, standing exactly as before, was Mrs. Gable. She wasn't looking at the courtyard. She was looking directly at my building, directly at my window. Her face was pale in the lamplight, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open, not in a scream, in an urgent, silent plea. The rational part of my brain shattered. This wasn't imagination. This was her. And she had something to say. The blackout ended, and an hour later, the light in her window vanished. She was gone. The next day, I went to the local library, digging through microfiche records. Eleanor Gable died November 12, 1993, age 78. Found alone in her apartment. No close family. The obituary was brief, but a small buried news snippet from a week later caught my eye. Police investigate impossible connection to disappearance of young woman Sarah Chen, last seen near Willow Creek Lane, October 31st, 1993. Ms. Chen was reportedly seen arguing with an elderly resident described as matching Ms. Gable's description, hours before vanishing. No charges filed. Case remains open. Sarah Chen. Vanished. Near here, after arguing with Eleanor Gable. My stomach lurched. Was that why Mrs. Gable's ghost was trapped? Guilt? A secret? Or was she trying to tell someone? To show where Sarah was? That night, I stood by my window, curtains wide open, staring across the courtyard. I held up a handwritten sign. Crude, but clear. What do you want? Mrs. Gable appeared almost instantly, as if summoned. She didn't look at the sign. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a profound, desperate urgency. She raised a thin, trembling hand and pointed, not at me, but down towards the ground floor of her building. Then she pointed emphatically at her own chest, over her heart. She mimed digging, shoveling earth. Her mouth moved, forming silent words. Dig, here, heart. My breath fogged on the cold window pane. She wasn't pointing to a grave outside. She was pointing to the floor of her apartment, the floor where she died, where Sarah Chen might have been hidden. She wanted me to find Sarah, to give her peace, to give herself peace. The weight of it pressed down on me. The decades of silence, the burden of a secret held by a ghost, the lost girl waiting in the dark earth beneath linoleum and floorboards. I couldn't go to the police. A ghost told me to dig up a vacant building. They'd laugh me out of the station. I had to do it myself. I waited until midnight. The city was quiet. I slipped out of my building, heart pounding, and approached 49 Willow Creek. The padlock on the front door was rusted, but the chain was old. I'd brought bolt cutters. The snick of the chain parting sounded like a gunshot in the silent street. The front door groaned open on stiff hinges, releasing a wave of stale, cold air that smelled of dust, mildew, and something else. Something sickly sweet, like old flowers left to rot. Inside, it was a time capsule. Faded floral wallpaper, a threadbare armchair, a small table with a teacup, the dregs long since evaporated, leaving a dark stain. And there, by the window, a straight-back chair, the place where she died. The floorboards near it looked different, slightly raised. Newer wood, poorly matched, covered by a thin, frayed rug. I dropped to my knees, pulling the rug aside. My fingers found the edge of a loose board. It lifted easily. Underneath wasn't dirt. It was a hollow space, and nestled in the cavity, wrapped in oilcloth that was brittle with age, was a small, leather-bound journal. As I pulled it out, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath plumed white. The single bare bulb in the hallway outside the apartment door flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows. And in the doorway, filling the frame, stood Mrs. Gable, not translucent, solid, real. She wasn't wearing her housecoat. She was in a simple, old-fashioned dress, her hair neatly combed. Her eyes weren't watchful anymore. They were filled with tears. She didn't speak. She just pointed at the journal in my hands, her expression a mixture of profound sorrow and desperate hope. I didn't open it there. I couldn't. I tucked it inside my jacket, the leather cold against my skin, and fled the apartment, rechaining the door as best I could. Back in my own place, under the bright, safe light of my desk lamp, I carefully unwrapped the oilcloth. The journal belonged to Sarah Chen. The entries were frantic, scared. She'd been Eleanor Gable's home health aide. She'd discovered Eleanor's secret, a hidden cache of stolen jewelry, heirlooms she'd taken from previous elderly tenants she'd cared for, tenants who had died under suspicious circumstances. Sarah had threatened to go to the police. The last entry, dated October 30th, 1993, was chilling. She knows I know. She's watching me all the time. Says if I tell, she'll say I stole it. She's got a place under the floor. She showed me. Said it's where troubles disappear. I'm so scared I have to get out tonight. Eleanor hadn't killed Sarah. She'd hidden her alive, buried her under the floor. The journal didn't say. But the implication was clear. Eleanor's guilt wasn't for murder, but for imprisonment, for letting fear and greed trap a young woman in the dark for 30 years. I knew what I had to do. I called the police first. Thing in the morning, anonymous, giving only the address and the words. Check under the floorboards near the window. You'll find Sarah Chen's journal, and maybe more. I hung up before they could trace the call. I watched from my window as police cars and a forensics van arrived at 49 Willow Creek. They broke down the door. Hours passed. Then a body bag was brought out. Not one, two, smaller, wrapped separately. Dental records, they'd confirmed Sarah Chen. The second body, older, female, Eleanor Gable. She hadn't died of a heart attack in her chair. She'd died down there in the dark with her secret. Had she gone down herself, consumed by guilt? Or had something else claimed her in the end? The news reported the discovery. The stolen jewelry was found hidden in a wall cavity. Mrs. Gable was posthumously charged in Sarah's kidnapping and imprisonment. The case was closed. Justice of a sort. That night, I opened my curtains. The window across the courtyard was dark, empty. Mrs. Gable was gone. The oppressive feeling of being watched had vanished. The apartment felt lighter, quieter, in a peaceful way. I thought it was over. I could finally breathe. I was wrong. 3 nights later, I woke to a soft tap, tap, tap on my window. Not rain, delicate, insistent, like fingernails. I sat up, dread coiling in my stomach. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Slowly, I turned toward the window. She was there, Sarah Chen, young, pale, her eyes wide with the same terror that filled her journal's final pages. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking down at the ground far below, her hands pressed against the glass as if trying to push through. Her mouth moved silently. Get me out. The floor under Eleanor's apartment wasn't the only grave, the courtyard soil itself. It held secrets. Eleanor had lied in her final ghostly plea. She'd pointed to her heart, to the floor, to distract. The real prison, the real grave was outside. And Sarah's spirit, freed from the suffocating dark under the floorboards, was now trapped above her own earthly remains, unable to move on, unable to find peace until her bones were found. The tapping grew louder, more frantic. Sarah's face pressed harder against the glass, her eyes now fixed on me, filled with a new desperate plea. You found a journal. You found her. Now find me. I sank back onto my bed, the weight of the house's history crushing me. The old woman in the window had been dead for 30 years, but her crime had chained another soul to this place, and now that soul was looking to me, the witness, the finder of secrets. The tapping didn't stop. It echoed in the silent room, a metronome counting down the seconds until I faced the truth buried in the soil below my window. The courtyard wasn't just overgrown, it was a cemetery. And Sarah Chen was still waiting. The old woman's guilt was absolved, but the debt remained, and I was the only one who could pay it. I pulled my knees to my chest, watching Sarah's pale face in the glass, her silent tears fogging the pain. The digging hadn't ended. It had just begun, and the next grave was mine to find. The tapping softened, became a whisper against the glass. Help me. I closed my eyes. The courtyard waited. The earth held its breath. And I knew I wouldn't sleep again until I turned its dark soil, searching for the bones of the girl who never came home. The old woman was gone, but her shadow stretched long, and it had fallen squarely on me. The window wasn't just a view anymore. It was a mirror reflecting a debt I couldn't refuse. Sarah's eyes held mine through the glass, a silent promise. You see me? Now set me free. And I knew, with a cold certainty that seeped into my bones, that I would, even if it meant digging until my own hands bled in the haunted earth of Willow Creek Lane. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. It was the silence of the grave, waiting to be opened. I got out of bed. I had a shovel to find. The story ends here. Let's begin the next one. The previous owner buried something under the floorboards, and it's awake. The realtor's smile didn't reach her eyes when she handed me the keys. "Hickory House is a steal at this price," she chirped, her manicured nails tapping the listing sheet. $800 a month for 3 bedrooms? In this market? She wouldn't meet my gaze, focusing instead on adjusting her scarf. Mr. Armitage was a private man, eccentric. Passed quietly in his sleep last winter, left everything just as is. She paused at the front gate, the overgrown hydrangeas scraping against her designer coat. One thing, he kept the master bedroom locked, said it was resting. The key's in the kitchen drawer. Use it if you must, but... She trailed off, glancing at the sagging porch roof. Some doors are better left unopened, especially after dark. I didn't ask why. I just nodded, the weight of my medical bills heavy in my chest. My daughter Lily's asthma medication didn't care about haunted houses. Hickory House smelled of dust and damp wool the moment I pushed open the front door. Not the cozy scent of an old home, but the stale, hollow breath of abandonment. Sunlight strained through grimy windows, illuminating motes dancing above furniture draped in yellowed sheets. The air hung unnaturally still, thick as cold syrup, carrying an underlying sweetness like forgotten apples left to rot in a cellar. The master bedroom door at the end of the hall was indeed locked, a heavy oak slab with a tarnished brass keyhole. I found the key exactly where she said, bottom drawer of the kitchen cabinet, tucked beneath a stack of mildewed cookbooks. It turned with a gritty click that echoed too loudly in the silence. The room was frozen in time. 1970s floral wallpaper peeled at the seams. A 4-poster bed stood stripped bare, its mattress stained with dark, irregular patches. But the floor was wrong. The wide pine planks near the closet were newer than the rest, patched. Haphazardly, the wood grain mismatched, the nails driven in at odd angles. One board near the baseboard was slightly raised, as if something beneath it had shifted. Kneeling, I ran my fingers along the seam. The wood felt unnaturally cold, and there was a smell, not dust or mildew, but wet earth and the faint metallic tang of old blood. Taped beneath the raised board was a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was spidery, frantic, the ink blotted as if written in shaking haste. It wasn't a cat. It wasn't rats. Don't listen to the scratching. Don't listen to the voice. It mimics. It remembers warmth. I buried it deep under the floorboards after the fever took Martha. I thought the cold would hold it. I was wrong. It's learning the shape of loneliness. It's learning you. Don't let it taste your tears. Don't let it hear your child cry. It hungers for the spaces between heartbeats. I tried to salt the seams. I tried iron nails. It only makes it angrier. God, forgive me. I let it have the dog first. Then the sparrows. Now it wants bigger warmth. It wants her laugh. Don't open the floor. Don't open the floor. Don't open the... The note ended in a jagged tear. My throat closed. Lily's laugh, bright and sudden as a bird song, echoed from the living room where she played with her stuffed rabbit. I shoved the note into my pocket, heart hammering. Eccentric, the realtor had called him. Resting. I slammed the bedroom door shut, turning the key until it bit into my thumb. For 3 days, I told myself it was dementia, ramblings of a grieving old man. I aired out rooms, scrubbed grime from windows, filled the house with the smell of lemon cleaner and boiling cinnamon to mask the underlying decay. I avoided the master bedroom. I slept on the living room couch with Lily tucked against my side, her small breaths warm on my neck. The scratching started on the fourth night, not from the walls, from under the floorboards, near the couch, a slow, deliberate scritch, 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 like fingernails on wood. Lily stirred, her breathing catching in that telltale wheeze. I held her tighter, rocking, humming, until her breaths smoothed. The scratching stopped, but as I carried her back to her room at dawn, I saw it, a thin line of damp, dark earth seeping from beneath the master bedroom door. I called the realtor. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I called the utility company claiming a gas leak to get a repairman out. The old man in coveralls poked around the basement tapping pipes. "No leaks, ma'am," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "But this house, it's got bad bones. Foundation settling uneven. See that?" He pointed to a hairline crack snaking up the basement wall, filled with a substance that looked like packed mud, not concrete. Old-timers used to pack earth in the cracks. Superstition. Said it kept the night things out. He chuckled, but his eyes darted toward the stairs. Though I wouldn't know about that. Just patch it with mortar, I'd say. He left without touching it. That afternoon, while Lily napped, I pried up the raised floorboard in the master bedroom. The wood splintered easily. Beneath it, the earth was black and slick, smelling of river clay and iron, and there were things buried in it, not bones, not artifacts, offerings. A child's porcelain doll with one eye gouged out, a rusted horseshoe bent inward, a mason jar filled with coarse gray salt, and a small leather-bound journal. I took only the journal, resealing the floor with trembling hands, the damp earth clinging to my fingers like cold sweat. Armitage's journal wasn't about ghosts. It was about hunger. Page after page detailed a presence he called the root, not a spirit, but something older, something that slumbered in the earth beneath the house, awakened by grief. It didn't want souls. It wanted the echoes of life, the warmth of a shared meal, the vibration of laughter, the salt of tears. It fed on absence. When his wife Martha died, her loneliness had been a feast. He'd tried to starve it, locking himself in silence, avoiding human contact, but it learned to mimic. It learned to call. March 12th, 1978. It spoke in Martha's voice last night. "Silas, the window's open. I'm cold." I almost went to her. God help me, I almost opened the floor. April 3rd, 1978. Buried the dog today. Poor Buster wouldn't stop whining at the master door. The root took his warmth. His body was stiff as stone, frozen solid in July heat. I put him in the hole with salt and iron nails. It only made the scratching louder. May the 17th, 1978. It's learning Lily's name. Not my Lily, God rest her, but the little girl next door. It heard me sighing over their laughter. It whispered, "Bring her to me. Her joy is so bright." I poured boiling water on the floorboards. The smell of burnt earth filled the room. It laughed. It sounded like stones grinding together. I burned the journal in the backyard fire pit that night, the pages curling into ash that smelled of burnt hair. I bought salt and iron nails from the hardware store, sprinkling the salt along the baseboards of the master bedroom, hammering nails into the floor seams until my palms blistered. Lily watched me, her small face serious. "Mommy, why's the house sad?" she asked, her voice tight, with another impending wheeze. "It's not sad, sweetheart," I lied, pulling her close. "Just old." The root ignored the salt. It ignored the iron. That night, as Lily coughed in her sleep, a new sound joined the scratching, a low, wet gurgle, like mud bubbling in a spring thaw, and a voice, thin as spider silk, slithered under my bedroom door. Warm, so warm, the little light let me taste it. Lily's breathing hitched into a full asthma attack. Her inhaler was empty. I fumbled for the phone, no signal. The landline was dead. The gurgling grew louder, closer, seeming to rise from the floor beneath my feet. The temperature plummeted. Frost bloomed across the window pane in jagged, black-veined patterns. In the moonlight, I saw it, a shape coalescing from the shadows near the closet, not solid, but a shifting mass of damp earth and root fibers, with two pits of cold light where eyes should be. It reached a limb like a gnarled tree root toward Lily's bed. I grabbed the iron fireplace poker, swinging wildly. It passed through the shape like smoke, but the thing recoiled with a hiss like steam on hot stone. The frost retreated. The gurgling faded. Lily's breathing slowed. Dawn found me slumped against her door, the poker still clutched in white-knuckled hands, the smell of wet earth thick in the air. I packed our bags that morning, called a cab. But as I carried Lily's suitcase to the porch, the front gate was chained shut, not locked. Chained, with thick, rusted links that hadn't been there. Yesterday, the cab driver honked impatiently, then drove away, shaking his head. My phone had one bar. I called 911. The dispatcher's voice crackled, distant. "Ma'am, we show no address for Hickory House on Elm Street. That property's been condemned since '79. Uninhabitable. Structural collapse risk." The line went dead. Trapped. The root grew bolder. It stopped hiding. During the day, dark, viscous mud seeped from the floor seams in the master bedroom, spreading like spilled ink across the hallway. At night, the gurgling became a chorus, a wet churning sound that vibrated in my teeth. It learned Lily's routines. When she sang in the bathtub, the pipes would shudder and the water would run thick and brown for an hour after. When she laughed at cartoons, the TV static would resolve into a distorted image, a face made of roots and mud, mouth open in a silent scream of hunger. The voice no longer mimicked Martha or Lily. It used my voice now, my exhaustion, my fear. "You can't save her," it whispered as I tucked Lily in. "Her lungs are weak, like your mother's, like Martha's. Let me warm her. I can make the coughing stop. Just open the floor, just a crack." Lily's breathing grew shallower. Her inhaler was useless. Her pediatrician's office had no record of her. No ambulance came when I called. I sat with her on a couch, rocking, watching the mud seep slowly toward us across the floorboards. The air smelled of decay and wet stone. The root's voice was a constant hum beneath the silence. "She's fading. Cold is coming. I can hold the cold back. I can hold her." Desperation is a dangerous thing. That night, while Lily slept fitfully, I stood before the master bedroom door. The lock felt warm in my hand, not comforting, hungry. I turned the key. The room stank of opened graves. The floorboards near the closet were buckled upward, earth oozing between the cracks. The gurgling was deafening here, a wet, sucking sound from deep below. I pried up the centerboard with the fireplace poker. The hole gaped wide, dark as a throat. Cold, damp air washed over me, and the voice, not whispering now, but crooning in my own exhausted tone. "Yes, yes, bring her warmth, feed the cold. She won't suffer. I'll keep her safe, always safe." I almost believed it. Lily's wheezing echoed from the living room. the promise of quiet, of peace. I took a step toward the hole. Then I saw it, a small white shape, half buried in the mud at the bottom. Lily's stuffed rabbit, the one she'd been playing with the day we moved in, the one that had vanished from her bed last Tuesday. It was coated in slime, one button eye missing. The root had taken it. It was learning her. Rage burned through the despair. This thing didn't want to save Lily. It wanted to replace her, to feed on the hollow space her death would leave. I slammed the floorboard back down, hammering it shut with the poker, until my arms ached. The gurgling turned to a shriek, a sound of tearing roots and crushing stone. The house shook. Plaster rained from the ceiling. In the living room, Lily screamed. I ran to her. She was sitting up in bed, eyes wide with terror, pointing at the corner. The mud wasn't just on the floor anymore. It was climbing. The walls, forming thick, root-like tendrils that pulsed with a sickly, greenish light. One tendril snaked toward Lily's nightstand, wrapping around her half-full glass of water. The water blackened instantly. The tendril retracted, dripping viscous fluid into the hole beneath the floorboards, feeding it. The voice boomed now, shaking the windows. "She is mine. The warmth is mine. You cannot keep her from the deep." The mud surged across the floor, cold as a winter river, reaching for Lily's bare feet. I grabbed her, clutching her to my chest, backing into the hallway. The front door was chained. The windows were sealed with a film of black, glistening mold. The only escape was the basement. I'd never been down there. Armitage's journal had called it the root's throat. The basement door in the mudroom was warped shut, the frame swollen with damp. I kicked it open, splinters flying. Dank, frigid air rushed out. Stone steps descended into utter blackness. Lily buried her face in my shoulder, coughing weakly. The mud was at our heels, rising in a slow, deliberate tide up the hallway. The gurgling was a roar now, filling the house, shaking the light bulbs until they shattered. I stumbled down the basement steps, the darkness swallowing us whole. My foot hit a switch. A single bare bulb flickered on, illuminating a nightmare. The walls weren't stone. They were made of roots, thick, black, pulsing veins that throbbed with that same sickly green light. They covered every surface, converging on a central mass in the far corner, a mound of writhing roots taller than me, slick with mud, studded with broken dolls, rusted nails and clumps of human hair. At its heart, two pits glowed with cold fire, the root's core. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating in my bones. "You cannot hide the warmth. I smell her fear, I smell her breath. Give her to the deep, or I will take her cold." The roots on the walls lashed like whips, cracking against the stone floor. One wrapped around my ankle, icy and strong as iron. I fell, Lily tumbling from my arms. She landed near the root mound, gasping, her small chest heaving. The core pulsed brighter, the cold light reflecting in her terrified eyes. A thick root uncoiled from the mound, sliding toward her face, drawn to her warmth. I fought the root binding my ankle, the cold seeping into my bones, slowing my blood. Lily's name tore from my throat, a raw animal sound. The root hissed, recoiling slightly. "Sadness," it breathed, the voice thick with ecstasy. "Sweet, bitter sadness. Feed me more." It was feeding on my fear, my grief, my love for her. That was its true sustenance, not her body, the hollow space her loss would carve in me. I stopped fighting. Let the cold take my leg. I crawled toward Lily, not away from the root, but toward it. Tears streamed down my face, hot against the unnatural chill. I didn't think of losing her. I thought of her. Her stubborn chin when she refused vegetables. The way she hummed off key in the bathtub. How she'd pressed her small hand to my cheek last week when I cried over bills and whispered, "It's okay, Mommy. I love you loud." I reached Lily, pulling her into my lap, wrapping my arms around her shuddering body. I buried my face in her hair, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and sweat. And I let the tears come, not tears of fear, tears of love, fierce, defiant, warm tears. I wept for her future birthdays, for her scraped knees, for the first day of school I'd never see. I wept for the life she deserved, not the death this thing craved. I poured every ounce of my love into those tears, a shield of pure human warmth. The root shrieked, a sound of tearing earth and splintering wood. The green light in its core flickered violently. The roots binding my ankle loosened, shriveling like burnt paper. The mud receded from the walls, dripping back into the cracks. The cold lessened, replaced by a fragile, ordinary chill. Lily's coughing eased. Her breathing deepened into exhausted sleep against my shoulder. Silence. The basement bulb flickered out. Moonlight filtered through a high, grimy window, illuminating the root mound. It was smaller now, duller. The pulsing light reduced to a faint ember glow. The voice was a dry rustle, weak, but still present. The warmth, it burns, but the hunger remains. I carried Lily upstairs. The house was quiet. No scratching, no gurgling. The mud on the floors was dry, crumbly dust. I locked the basement door with 3 new deadbolts. I sealed the master bedroom floorboards with industrial adhesive, then covered them with a heavy rug. I salted every windowsill. I hung iron nails above every door frame. It's not over, I know that. The root is weakened, not gone. It sleeps. But it dreams of warmth, of Lily's laughter, of my tears. Lily's asthma is better. The doctors call it a miracle. I don't correct them. At night, when she sleeps soundly in a new room, the farthest from the master bedroom, I sit on the living room rug, my back against the sealed basement door. I listen, not for scratching, for breathing. The house breathes now, slow, deep, like something ancient settling back into slumber. Sometimes, when the moon is full, I smell wet earth, and a voice, faint as a dying ember, whispers from the floorboards, "Warmth. Remember? Warmth." I don't answer. I just hold Lily tighter and wait, because I know what Armitage learned too late. You can't starve a hunger like this. You can only feed it something else. Something that doesn't cost a life. I feed it my memories of Martha Armitage's laugh, of Silas's stubborn hope, of the sparrows that used to nest in the eaves. I feed it the warmth of every kind word, every shared meal with neighbors who finally returned my calls, every sunrise over Hickory House's overgrown garden. It's not enough to sate it, but it's enough to keep it sleeping. The realtor called last week. "Heard you're staying," she said, her voice tight. "Good, the house needs a keeper." There was no smile in her words, only relief. She knows. They all know on Elm Street. They leave baskets of vegetables on my porch. They don't ask why I keep salt in my pockets, why I never open the basement door, why I rock Lily to sleep in the living room every night, my back pressed against the sealed wood. Last Tuesday, Lily brought me a dandelion from the garden. "For the sad house, Mommy," she said, her eyes clear, her breath steady. I took it, placed it on the sealed trapdoor to the basement. That night, the whisper was softer, almost gentle. Yellow, like sun, like her hair. I didn't smile, but I didn't flinch. I tucked Lily in, kissed her forehead, and sat down on the rug by the basement door. I closed my eyes, and I remembered. Not the fear, the warmth, the stubborn, flickering warmth of a little girl who brought a dandelion to a hungry dark. The house held its breath. And for now, that's enough.